Welcome everyone to the 33rd Annual HMS Colloquium. I am your host and moderator, Emmanuel Kim, the Korea Foundation and Kim Renaud Professor of Korean Literature and Culture Studies in the Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures here at the George Washington University. For those who are joining us live in person and online, welcome to the nation's capital. Established by EALL, that's the East Asian Languages and Literatures, back in 1995, the Moo-Sook Colloquium is one of the longest running academic outreach programs in the humanities at the George Washington University and the nation. This annual meeting provides a forum for discussion of Korean humanities on the arts, history, language, literature, religion, and all other aspects that cover Korean studies in the context of East Asia and the world. The HMS Colloquium series is made possible by an endowment gift from the Moo-Sook Foundation that honors Moo-Sook herself, one of Korea's most honored writers, to uphold her spirit of openness, curiosity, commitment to education, and intercultural exchange. Now, as we know, Korean culture has become more and more visible globally. BTS and Blackpink are now old news. We have Huntrix Golden hitting the charts and staying there for many, many weeks, and still on the top 10 list on Netflix. Emmy Awards for Squid Game Best Director and Actor are of the past. Lee Jung-jae and Lee Byung-hun are now household names, if not very recognizable faces in Hollywood. The rise of K-dramas as a global streaming phenomenon has transformed the politics of entertainment, bridging cultural divides and fostering cross-cultural exchanges. Today's colloquium explores the transcultural dimensions of K-dramas, focusing on how they present, represent, and translate various cultures, peoples, and languages across diverse streaming platforms. Our presenters today will examine the evolution of narrative techniques, global circulation of emotions, history of consumerism and product placement, homosocial eroticism, and the impact of these dramas on global audiences. By situating K-dramas within the broader framework of transcultural communication, this year's colloquium underscores their significance in promoting cultural diversity and understanding and in an increasingly interconnected world, ultimately aiming to contribute to the discourse on global media, cultural identity, and the evolving nature of storytelling in the digital age. Today, I would like to start with this year's colloquium with a very distinguished guest. First, I would like to invite our great leader, the director of GWIX, Celeste Arrington, to open with congratulatory remarks.
As you can tell, Emmanuel is a hard act to follow. I'm not Emmanuel Kim, but instead I am Celeste Arrington, director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies and Korea Foundation Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs here at the George Washington University. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome all of you to today's 33rd Annual Moo-Sook Colloquium in the Korean Humanities, and I'm especially glad to welcome our distinguished speakers today. GWIX, as we call the GW Institute for Korean Studies, really has its roots in the Moo-Sook Colloquium. GWIX was founded nearly 10 years ago, and our mission here in DC, in the nation's capital, is to serve as a hub for Korean studies, but also to diversify the types of topics that we consider when we think about the Korean Peninsula, as well as to foster deeper and broader understandings of the Korean Peninsula. And there's really no better way to do that than through this Moo-Sook Colloquium. Really, GWIX was founded off of the roots that Professor Jung Kim Renaud, who you'll hear from in a second, built through the Moo-Sook Colloquium. And so we are very glad to be partners now in sponsoring this annual humanities event. I would also like to extend a great deal of thanks to our partners in East Asian languages and literatures, as well as at the Korea Foundation and the Korea Cultural Center for their support of this colloquium. And most importantly, this beautiful setup today and the extensive logistics involved would not be possible without our GWIX staff, Ravina Yugale and Habin Peck, who are sitting behind the pillar back there working hard, but also all of the other assistance that they've received from the Seeger Center and the East Asia National Resources Center staff. All of us here work as a team, but they do a lot of the, they bear the brunt of the work. And so I want to thank them for all of the logistics today. On behalf of us at GWIX, I really extend a great deal of welcome to all of you and encourage you to continue to keep in touch with GWIX. We have a variety of different events, including some next week on Tuesday or the following week on Tuesday. And so please do keep in touch. And as we seek to foster a deeper and broader understanding of Korea in the nation's capital, we hope that we can do so with you. So let me now turn it over to our Supreme Leader, Yoongi Kim Renault, for some remarks about this colloquium. Thank you.
Next, I'm very happy that this guest is able to join us. He just flew in to town just to attend this, right? Please join me in welcoming Director Jung Park, the Director of Korean Cultural Center here in DC. Director Park.
Good afternoon. I'm Jung Park, Director of Korean Cultural Center, Washington, D.C. It's my honor to join you today in celebrating 33rd anniversary for Hahn Colloquium. I'm very happy to the George Washington University provide us this very good platform for introduce Korean drama. One of my before my Korean Cultural Center Washington D.C. position, I worked for Ministry of Culture and Tourism, Sport and Tourism, and I think 10 years ago, I was a director of policy division of in cultural industry. In that time, I was trying to make some rules about the drama's workers and environment, and they improve their life. For example, minimum wage and their work experience. Even if sometimes they have no official contract for in the drama, the screening center. So I'm thank you for current this Korean drama popularity. I think their contribution to the Korean drama. Sometimes they ask for us to improve their work experience for that. I want to say that the Korean drama has the real life Korean. For example, last week, one of my friends visited Washington, D.C. for annual the World Bank meeting. So one of my friend is he's a son of the Hyun, the women's diver. Do you know the when life gives you the tangerine, the 폭삭 he introduced their mom story, and his mom currently woman diver, and actually she advised the drama for that. And it's a real life, I think that. So I want the Korean drama has the real life in Korean. So enjoy the Korean today, the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Park. Okay, now, finally, this wouldn't be a HMS Colloquium without the vision and love for the humanities and arts from Professor Emeritus Yoongi Kim Renault, who is actually the daughter of Moo-Sook. So please join me in welcoming Yoongi Kim Renault.
Thank you, Emmanuel. It is my great honor and pleasure to the 33rd Hahn Colloquium in the Korean humanities. This year's topic invites us to reflect on the remarkable evolution of Korean drama, not only as a cultural product, but as a global phenomenon that continues to shape and be shaped by diverse audiences. In 1996, my husband there and I were among the first guests at the newly opened Daewoo Hotel in Hanoi, Vietnam. At the time, South Korea had only recently established diplomatic ties with Vietnam, and the hotel's opening marked more than economic expansion. It signaled Korea's growing cultural presence in Southeast Asia. I vividly recall a gift shop owner who hesitated to sell anything during the broadcast of Jealousy, 질투, a romantic drama starring Choi Jin-sil and Choi Soo-jong. The show captivated Vietnamese viewers with its emotional freshness, offering a stark contrast to the Chinese and Russian programming that had long dominated the airwaves there. That moment foreshadowed the Korean wave, Hallyu, which has since grown into a global current. Korean dramas, once modest in scale, now boast high production values, sophisticated storytelling, and international acclaim. Advances in technology, actor training, and audience research have helped K-dramas reach viewers across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Yet with success comes complexity. As K-dramas travel further and farther, they face the challenge of balancing cultural specificity with global appeal. Some narratives risk oversimplifying or exoticizing Korean life, while others strive to resonate across different social contexts. Still, the genre's strength remains in its emotional accessibility, its ability to connect through gesture, expression, and shared human experiences. K-dramas have become a mirror and a bridge. Koreans, ever curious travelers, have discovered themselves through others, and in doing so, have contributed to global culture, not as imitators, but as leaders, influencers, and motivators. And audiences around the world have responded with enthusiasm, finding joy in both the familiar and the unfamiliar. As we gather today, we celebrate this transcultural dialogue. We affirm a simple but profound truth. People are drawn to those who resemble them, but they are also moved by those who are different. This insight, so central to the spirit of the Moo-Sook Colloquium, continues to guide our exploration of Korean humanities. I thank all the collaborators and sponsors, including the Korean Cultural Center and the Korea Foundation, and of course, all my colleagues at GW, staff members there. It's just an incredible unifier of people of different disciplines, interests, and also hopes. And this is a wonderful gathering. And you, the honored guests, without you, this would not have been possible. this was the same from the very outset. It's interesting. Our speakers are becoming younger and younger. It's not because of the time, but we are becoming so open and not so much bound by so-called authenticity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll get started. Our first speaker in the first panel is Steve Choe, an associate professor of critical studies in the School of Cinema at San Francisco State University, who researches and teaches in film and media theory. He's the author of many books, and he is going to talk about My Heart Goes Out to You, K-dramas and global circulation of feeling. Please welcome, introduce Steve Choe.
So a recent paper by Minju Lee elaborates on the phenomenon of Hallyu tourism. Tourism to South Korea spurred by the meteoric rise in global popularity for cultures such as K-pop, Korean cinema, Korean cuisine, cosmetics, sports, fashion, and K-drama. Lee explains how a hit K-drama can drive demand for products through product placement, as well as travel to locations where significant plot points take place. One of these is Descendants of the Sun, the hugely successful Korean-Chinese co-production broadcast in 2016 that was distributed as well to 27 countries, including France, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the Philippines, and the United States. The last 4 episodes showcase the famous lead and supporting actors ordering coffee at a Tusum Place cafe, driving the self-steering Hyundai Genesis, and eating choco pies. The series is credited with inspiring tourists to visit key locations featured in the story, specifically in Gangwon Province and the military camp in Paju. While enjoying the rural scenery in the Gyeonggi-do area, visitors may reminisce on where the so-called Song couple were compelled to suppress and keep secret due to their military obligations, their growing desire for each other. According to Lee, the story of their suppressed feelings inspired viewers of Descendants of the Sun to gain emotional proximity to the drama's characters by traveling from their home countries to visit Korea as Hallyu tourists. Interestingly, some viewers not familiar with the Korean language have reportedly enjoyed watching live stream episodes of their favorite dramas without knowing what the characters were saying, without subtitles. They claim to have felt the emotions felt by the characters despite their lack of fluency in Korean. Hallyu as a transnational media and tourism phenomenon, Minju Lee writes, is possible because technology was able to successfully ferry emotions across geographic and cultural boundaries. I want to take this claim further and propose a way to read the K-drama's ferrying of sincere and sentimental emotion as intimately linked to its particular poetics. Speaking directly about specific emotions remains difficult because they are elusive and subjective, but I want to turn our attention to the aesthetic and technological means by which these emotions are produced by the K-drama in particular. In doing so, my hope is to provide a set of terms by which we can understand emotion and moving image narrative in other traditions and mediums in general. So let me move quickly and turn to what I'm calling the affective interlude. I believe that a particular poetics of the K-drama can be isolated, not in the moments where dialogue and narrative action dominate, but, as the term suggests, in those between that provide respite from the narrative's forward movement. The affective interlude is ubiquitous in the K-drama, expressing moments of sincere sentimentality, while typically featuring a character simply feeling something, loneliness, disappointment, resolve in the face of emotional adversity, heartbreak, but also quiet wonder, the glow felt by a character who shares chemistry with another, or the gratitude felt in receiving a kind gesture from another character. While struggling in a world where the constant performance of a virtuous public persona has become overwhelming, the affective interlude reveals private, tender feelings, the vulnerability of the self that is unsure whether societal pressures can be overcome. Facial expressions and bodily gestures are made into a spectacle in these moments, facilitated through slight camera movements, rack focus, and slow motion. These elements illustrate the sensitivity of a character while enabling the flourishing of emotion. The interlude's production of emotion summarizes the wholesomeness that I believe is crucial to K-drama affect. In turn, the viewer is solicited to feel something as well, to feel with another personality on screen through the mediation of the televisual apparatus. When a beset character expresses hardship in overcoming social challenges that are linked to the consequences of capitalism, the ideological tensions between tradition and modernity, or Korea's intensely competitive culture, the spectacle of their emotional fragility or their true self solicits the viewer to recognize their essential virtue and sympathize with them by shedding tears. The spectacle of Tong-eun's childhood wounds, for example, in The Glory, or Eun-sang's recognition of her deaf mother's sacrifice in the Inheritors, significant moments in the plot showcase the private emotions of a character and attest to their courage in feeling them. Instead, the sympathy solicited by the interlude is fundamental to understanding how the K-drama generates soft power, indeed, but also the therapeutic effects of the K-drama that has been reported by some viewers. If emotion is important to understanding the K-drama, I want to draw attention to its form and aesthetics, to the discursive means by which it solicits viewers to feel something at all. So now I have a clip. The idea here is that moments like this that are abound in K-dramas really emblemize that which is particular to K-drama aesthetics, this kind of appeal to very sincere emotion and almost the courage that, an appreciation of the courage of the characters to feel this and then to make it into kind of a spectacle. So K-drama mediality may be read in the allegorically in thinking the interactions between Kim Tae-ri's sensing body and the outdated phone booth technology as analogous to the body of the drama lover and the televisual technology. Both of these bring people together through technical means. This interlude is set in 1998 during the aftermath of the IMF, when devices like VHS players, bulky flip phones, computers with disk drives, and oversized headphones were part of everyday life in Korea. Through the aesthetics of the interlude, but also self-reflexive of it, voicemail and public phones acquire affective meaning within the world of 2521, attesting to the forms of affectionate feeling that are expressed and distributed by technology. The soft focus cinematography and slow pan across Hido's face, her eyes filled with tears, solicit the K-drama viewer to comport him or herself sympathetically to her deeply felt gratitude and perhaps even to shed tears as well. When she presses the buttons on the phone keypad, the ballad Your Existence by Weinstein takes over the soundtrack, reminding us of the crucial role that music plays in soliciting emotion within the affective interlude. Its lyrics express the thoughts of someone who is distant from the one he or she loves, underscoring her longing and the possibility of romance. In the K-drama, a sparse instrumental melody articulated through piano or guitar notes, strings, or perhaps wordless vocals convey the rise and fall of emotion through crescendos and diminuendos. Ostinato motives and percussion instruments may be utilized for more intense, heart-pounding moments. But even when the relationship between sound and image seems arbitrary, the music allows the viewer to feel their way through the sequence of images. In this sense, the K-drama may be likened to opera. It's perhaps not a surprise then that characters in many K-dramas often harbor a talent for music, whether as members of a band, classical musicians, singers, and K-pop idols, or as composers. Characters who make music flesh out the affective interlude and authenticate the sincerity of their emotion, making explicit the grain of a particular body through its production of musical sound. The affective interlude highlights these sincere emotions as inseparable from media and the worlds that mediate the human body. At issue then is the manner in which the body affects and is affected by other objects, and is facilitated to comport itself toward particular styles of being by its surrounding environments. The world of the K-drama is one that is governed not by notions of linear space, time, and logos, but the logic of sense and affect that bring people into relation to each other. A K-drama will often consist of only a few locations, such as a restaurant and the protagonist's apartment, but rarely does it elucidate how characters traverse the space to get from one place to the next. Because they do not typically speak during these sequences, the need for close-ups and shot-reverse shot patterns may be lessened, and instead we are given long shots of their bodies, often in deep focus, integrated into scenic backdrops. A panoramic shot of Gyeonggi province, a seaside location with a lighthouse, a small family-run restaurant, but also the bedroom, a lonely bar, a morgue, or the roof of a high-rise building. These locations contribute more to the mood of the image and less toward moving the plot forward. Usually these are locations featuring open areas that are devoid of other people, giving the drama's protagonists opportunities to allow private feelings to overflow into the public space around them. The image may be slow to emphasize and elongate these visuals. Something like a moment of vision may take place, replete with close-up shots, rousing music, and fascinated reaction shots when a character sees and feels attraction for another. Slow motion does not simply provide the opportunity to observe the optical unconscious of a character, but itself becomes a means for expressing subjective emotion while soliciting spectator sympathy. The viewer, in turn, is solicited to recognize the love, gratitude, loneliness, disappointment, resignation, or quiet wonder felt by these characters, perhaps as the drama cuts to a close-up shot that slowly moves across their face. The interlude often revolves around characters who are powerless to act. Their only entitlement is to feel. IU's character in My Mister has a cold exterior because of her troubled past, but during the affective interlude, her character is revealed to be fragile and delicate, in need of protection. Interludes like these showcase intimate emotion as deeply felt, perhaps inspiring the viewer to reflect on his or her own life challenges and the historical factors that give rise to them. The interlude is where Korea's experience of compressed modernity intersects with the melodramatic mode. Societal problems are transfigured into mythical terms that point towards seemingly eternal struggles, while their complexities are reduced to simplistic, morally binary conflicts concomitant with melodrama's syncretic form. It offers fantasies of justice in the face of historical injustice when action is rendered impossible due to circumstances beyond the character's control. Yet, while the cultural and historical contexts are important to understand, we can also draw our attention to the technical means by which these histories are K-dramatized, as it were. The word affect in the affective interlude designates the potentiality of any body to affect and be affected by another. It spectacularizes inner emotion for the aesthetics of television, rendering it sensational, visceral, and morally explanatory. Its aim is to elicit a reaction. More specifically, the interlude places the body in a preparatory disposition, soliciting a comportment of sincerity in order to ready it to feel something. Affect is precisely this potential emotion, but also the trigger for feeling and actions, whether comforting or threatening, that is anticipated to be enacted upon the body. What matters most is that these places house memories of affective and sentimental significance for the characters. Reading the interlude provides us with a key to understanding not only this significance, but also a keyhole for perceiving the styles of thinking and feeling that belong to Korean humanity. The use of polite speech and titles, tone of voice, eye contact, etiquette signaled through gestures, etiquette while drinking alcohol, and one's ethical comportment and attitude towards others communicates moral character. To speak Korean is to attend to the lang of Korean sociality and ethics. One attends to Korean sociality by remaining sensitive to how speech acts and attitudes convey sentiments, instigate offense, and express affection toward others. When the affective interlude appears in popular moving image narratives of other cultures, it makes legible the ethical norms and the structures of feeling that ostensibly belong to these contexts. In episode 2 of Arthdal Chronicles from 2019 on Netflix, one of the main protagonists of the drama, Eun-Sum, is barred from inclusion into the Hahn tribe and is told to leave the community. His existence transgresses taboos surrounding the law of exogamy, like many K-dramas that deal with illegitimacy, while turning his search for legitimacy into a melodrama whereby he is always too late. I'm more interested here in the way in which this interlude functions as a kind of gateway into a media ecology that implicates a community of K-drama lovers who are thinking and feeling within the Korean linguistic context. Belonging nowhere and exasperated, he dives into a lake as the drama enters into a short interlude. Eun-Sum looks up through the blue water at the shining sun. His body suspended, the image slows down, and words previously spoken by himself and the Great Mother are heard in voiceover. These memories reiterate the drama surrounding the question of his identity. As the viewer is invited to ponder his loss of self, they are solicited to feel Eun-Sum's anguish with the rising orchestral soundtrack. When Eun-Sum looks at the sun, the shot shows his point of view. And when the interlude recalls words that were said about his exile, these are words that he himself has heard. The slowing image and minimalist music underscore his melancholy. It is as if the natural surroundings, the sun and trees, bend in deference to Eun-Sum's plight, in synchrony with the audiovisual technology and in sympathy with his anguish. The affective interlude does not emphasize the voyeuristic, disembodied view from outside that characterizes the pleasures of narrative cinema. A point of view shot may be deployed to show what a character is seeing and to align the image with a character's field of vision. In a shot reverse shot sequence, this most typical of techniques for editing a conversation between individuals, objective and subjective shots alternate to show what a character is saying and the response to what is said. The affective interlude is also composed of these shots, of course, but in its appeal to sympathy, it does not conflate the subjective and objective, but provides an objective spectacle of a subjectivity. Eun-Sum agonizes over his lack of belonging, but this experience of anguish is an expression of an interiority that is to be observed by someone else, by us, by K-drama viewers. He is alone in the interlude, surrounded by the water, the sky, and the sun, and while these surroundings, including the voiceover and music, all revolve around his emotion, this emotion is manifest for the spectator outside the scene. The division between the subjective and objective remains intrinsic to its enunciation. Yet this very division, the simultaneity of subjective and objective perception, one inside the character feeling something and the other outside him or her, that makes space for the gaze of the viewer. The interlude recalls this sympathy itself to be divided in precisely the same way, an ethical comportment that dreams of becoming the other while fully aware of its impossibility. Deleuze, citing Mitry, calls this a cinematographic Mitsein, in that this perception image, quote, no longer mingles with the character, nor is it outside, it is with him. Thus, in its appeal to his or her sympathies, the affective interlude draws the viewer's attention to the subjective emotions of characters on screen. The elements of sound and image coalesce around their perspective as he or she feels something, accompanying them as they ponder the histories of their relationships while depicting their personal memories through flashback. The affective interlude manifests, in other words, a free indirect discourse whereby the objective perspective offered by the televisual apparatus coalesces with the subjectivity of the character. Free indirect discourse is a literary term that points to moments within a narration when the third-person language of the narrator takes on the style and subjective voice of a character within the narrative. Correspondingly, as the psyche and inner sentiments of a character are given over to the aesthetics of the affective interlude in the K-drama, they are projected toward the world and met halfway. Above all, emotion in the affective interlude aims to be shared with others. Indeed, this emotional sense that is shared, transnational, and inspired by the K-drama may be likened to the Kantian Immanuel Kant sensus communis, particularly, and this is my last point before I'll conclude. When we think of how Korean television and the affective interlude as they circulate on global streaming platforms, in his critique of judgment, Kant distinguishes common human understanding from the sensus communis, or common sense, in a manner that helps us understand the public intimacy created on Disney Plus and among Netflix's 300 million global subscribers. Both the shared sense of emotion and the sense shared by the sensus communis are invested in elevating private experience toward universal significance in accordance with the ethics of the categorical imperative. While understanding is typically required the concept and its representation for it to be communicated, the sensus communis aspires toward universality without the mediation of concepts, without the assurances provided by the faculties of reason. Kant relegates this sense to the realm of taste, quote, as the faculty of estimating what makes our feeling in a given representation universally communicable without the mediation of a concept. Taste seeks, above all, the feeling of pleasure and may have affinities with the affective and emotional comprehensions experienced by K-drama fans, and maybe especially those who do not understand the Korean language except through the aesthetics of the affective interlude. Kant insists that others ought to judge something beautiful based on a universal conceptless sensus communis. This ought may be compared to that imperative that is generated precisely in the affective interlude, the solicitation, but also a demand to feel with and to accept the sincerity of an on-screen character. In its function as a signifier of expressivity, the affective interlude gives credence to the notion that audiovisual signs, the face, the hands, a location in Seoul, cinematography, the accompanying music, but also the speaking body and speech itself, acquire meaning as essentially gestural phenomenon. Words spoken in voiceover do not simply signify literal or even figurative meaning, but acquire the illocutionary properties of expressive auditory events akin to the affective power of music. Symptomatic sympathy, in fact, exactly describes the mechanism of what some call the soft power of global K-culture, the appeal of Korea through the solicitation of Korean emotion. The most important interludes allegorize this appeal through the depiction of technologies that bring individuals together through the sensus communis of the K-drama. They self-reflexively manifest the mediality of the K-drama as it is distributed, consumed, and loved today, the technology that constitutes a community whose members are physically far apart, but brought into intimacy through the private experience of sincere feeling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And as we prepare, let me introduce you to our next speaker. Ji-Yoon is an assistant professor of modern Korean popular culture at the University of British Columbia, Canada. With a background in music and film studies, she received her PhD in East Asian Studies from the University of Cambridge, UK in 2018, where she specialized in Korean cinema. Her research, broadly speaking, explores trends and patterns in Korean visual culture as a means of examining the symbiotic relationship between society and culture. Please welcome Ji-Yoon.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm so delighted to be a part of this colloquium. I love any opportunity to talk about K-drama, and I'm ashamed to say I'd seen every single drama that was on the slideshow before. So I hope we have enough K-drama fans and that I will keep you as equally entertained if possible. So my presentation today is really born out of my love for K-dramas, particularly of romance stories. So romances have been at the heart of the Korean televisual storytelling, and the customary arc has been the Cinderella story, featuring a kind but often poor female who meets her true love, commonly in the form of a young rich man, and together they endure a fated yet twisted love story filled with anticipated tropes such as fast loves, what fans have called psycho second leads, and various obstacles to being together, like memory loss, disease, and or opposing family. And by repeatedly playing on the same narrative and formal tropes, these dramas have created a specific kind of watching experience in which the fans anticipate tropes and watch out for variations to the genre, what I call in short the K-romance experience. The history of the K-drama and its epic love stories arguably begins with the advent of commercial broadcasting in Korea from as far back as the 1960s. But I begin my interest in the evolution of the K-romance from the 2000s onwards, because most of the tropes that define the contemporary K-dramas today can be traced back to the hit shows from the early 2000s. So at the start of the new millennium, the melodrama genre dominated K-romances, as exemplified by the Endless Love drama series, also known as the Seasons dramas. So for those who may not be aware, these were 4 shows released between 2000 and 2004, each named after one of the seasons. So, Autumn in My Heart, Winter Sonata, Summer Scent, and Spring Waltz. And these romance melodramas were pioneering, not just in reaching peak viewership domestically of, they say, up to 46%, which is basically half of the nation, but also for propelling the first Hallyu wave across Asia in the early 2000s. They were seen as the first key works that launched the Pan-Asiatic fever for K-drama. And as discussed by various scholars and mentioned before, the filming sites of these series have now become established tourist sites in South Korea. Along with other hit shows from this time, such as Stairway to Heaven, All In, I'm Sorry, I Love You, melodramas dominated the early 2000s. And as those familiar with K-drama will know well, these dramas also famously established 2 central tropes of the K-romance. First, the idea of fated love, often manifesting in childhood connections. And second, a terminal illness that eventually kills one of the main characters. And the latter trope got so overworked, as you are probably aware, in the major big budget dramas of this period, that it eventually became a running joke that a K-drama will either kill one of its lovers or give them amnesia. And if anyone's seen Crash Landing on You, you'll recall this scene in episode 2, where a North Korean soldier comments that in South Korea, 9 out of 10 people are suffering from amnesia. It's a common illness in capitalist countries. And my favorite is the response where the other North Korean soldiers like, is it because they drink too much Coke? Right? So this is obviously playing on the ridiculousness of previous K-dramas for overusing the trope of amnesia. And unsurprisingly, these fatigued tropes of terminal illness and amnesia slowly dissipated from the major hit shows by the late 2000s. And in general, melodrama as the mode of delivery for epic love stories was slowly replaced with rom-coms that still featured impossibly difficult romances, often having to overcome class barriers. So from the mid to late 2000s, feel-good shows like Full House, My Lovely Samsoon, The First Shop of Coffee Prince renewed the trend of rom-coms. And now considered modern-day classics of K-drama, these shows also played a critical role in propelling the Korean wave, the next wave. So Coffee Prince is frequently mentioned, and we talked about this during lunch as well, is frequently mentioned by North American fans as their first K-drama experience, while Full House is also commonly named as a favorite by Korean Americans. And the central narrative tropes of these 3 dramas have also become recurring and consistent traits of the K-romance landscape. So for example, body swapping, the gender swapping in Coffee Prince started the trend of both fantasy body swapping and gender bending narratives, such as in the examples here. So, you would have heard of Secret Garden, Love in the Moonlight, Mr. Queen perhaps as well. And you can see from the dates here that the trend continues to relatively recent years. Meanwhile, Full House, along with another hit from 2003 called 1% of Anything, established the trope of contract marriage that has since become another popular meet cute, as seen in these examples here. And again, My Demon is from just last year, so you can see that this is a continuing trope even up until kind of very recent years. So against this backdrop of the evolution of the K-romance since the 2000s, with melodramas and rom-coms comprising the 2 main strands of the genre, I'm interested in the trajectory of tropes, in particular of the male lover. So elsewhere, I examine the trend of what I call the fantasy heritage rom-com. So starting with the hit show My Love from the Start, which is still my all-time favorite, in which the male lead is an alien who came to Earth on a scientific field trip and then got left behind and has to live here for 400 years. But since this hit show, we start to see otherworldly beings continually as the object of love stories in the 2010s, taking such form as a webtoon character in W, a mermaid in Legend of the Blue Sea, a tokebi or goblin as they translate it in English, which is a traditional folklore character, in Guardian, the Lonely and Great God, and a monkey king in A Korean Odyssey. And in all 5 of these dramas, otherworldly beings form heterosexual relationships with their counterpart human characters. And what follows is a generic rom-com storyline that has been spiced up with fantastical elements such as transit between different worlds or time periods, in addition to the possession of supernatural powers. But what is crucial in these fantasy love stories is the fact that it is usually the male lovers who are bestowed with magical and superhuman characteristics, which incidentally they then use to conform to the damsel in distress formula, where the weaker female is in danger and somehow requires the protection of a man. And the only exception is The Legend of the Blue Sea, in which the female character is the magical being. So she's a mermaid, and if anyone's seen the drama, you'll know that she has my favorite superpower skill ever on TV, which is that when she cries, her tears turn into pearls. So anytime she feels poor and she needs money, she just puts on a sad film and cries, and that's her income. So even in this film where she has super intelligence and everything, it's still the male lead who uses hypnosis and his general intelligence to save all the characters from impending death. So as one Korean critic so aptly describes, K-dramas seem to have evolved past godlike men to actual gods who don the appearance of good-looking human men. Now their abilities surpass the realm of human strength. So in this previous publication where I analyzed how generic hybridity affects conventional gender politics of K-romances, I ultimately argued that generic hybridity acts as the camouflage and therefore diegetic justification for the conservative damsel in distress narratives in these dramas, legitimizing the traditional gender portrayals of K-romances in a post-feminist world through a hybrid engagement with fantasy. So this previous paper focused on a very distinct variation of the K-romance within the 2010s that featured non-human lovers, specifically with supernatural powers. But I have observed a similar pattern of extraordinary male lovers in non-fantasy K-romances. So in hit dramas such as Descendants of the Sun, Mr. Sunshine, Crash Landing on You, and lastly Queen of Tears, one observes male lovers who, though human and therefore without superpowers, display incredible prowess, both physically and intellectually, to once again protect and save their female counterparts in extraordinary and spectacular ways. So for example, Captain Ju of Descendants of the Sun is in the South Korean Army Special Forces, and he repeatedly exhibits physical strength in saving the protagonist, but namely his lover, from both natural and human threats. So in one scene, he even goes against military orders to single-handedly defeat a local warlord in a terrorist act where his lover has been kidnapped. Similarly, the male lead of the period drama Mr. Sunshine is Captain Eugene Choe of the US Marine Corps, who returns to Korea at the beginning of the 1900s and eventually falls in love with a nobleman's granddaughter. And he uses his American status and foreign connections, as well as superior military skills, to help his lover in her endeavors as a freedom fighter for the Korean Righteous Army. Crash Landing on You, which is probably the most rom-com of this body of works, is set in North Korea, where a South Korean businesswoman and heiress to a family business conglomerate, a chaebol, becomes stranded in North Korea via a paragliding accident. And here, her only hope lies in the North Korean elite and captain, who initially discovers her and aids her in her return to the South. Unlike these 3 dramas that utilize a military identity to represent heroic masculinity, the male lover of Queen of Tears is the son of a farmer who has become a successful lawyer at a big company. And as he marries the third generation heiress of this company, he's thrown into the world of the ultra-rich, where his intelligence, and he also has hidden fighting skills from his military service in the Korean Special Marine, blah, blah, blah. But he also then proves crucial for navigating the multiple attacks on him and his wife's lives. And considering that these dramas, along with the fantasy heritage rom-coms, encompass some of the most successful K-dramas of the previous decade, I am fascinated by this parallel way that these two bodies of work similarly revolve around the idea of extraordinary male lovers. And yet, the generic means through which the trope of the capitalist knight in shining armor is upgraded differs between these two bodies of works. So in fantasy heritage rom-coms, the fantasy setting provides a very easily justifiable context in which the male lover must display his supernatural skills in order to match the evil supernatural forces. However, in this second body of K-romances described just above, they have no fantasy setting, so the narratives must direct the circumstances to justify these men's heroism. So specifically, I note that the narratives are imbued with melodrama in the classical sense, in that protagonists are presented with a series of sensational events that elicit both dramatic action and emotion. In creating a situation in which men can act as heroes, the settings of the narratives then become crucial, regularly taking place in foreign and precarious locations where the physical actions of the male leads become vital for survival. So for example, Descendants of the Sun takes place in a fictional foreign country where the characters regularly endure an earthquake, a viral outbreak of some fictional virus that is supposedly deadlier than Ebola, and even terrorist attacks by local warlords dealing in human and arms trafficking. In other words, the fictional land of Uruk provides fertile ground for heroic action. Similarly, most of Crash Landing on You is set in North Korea, or rather an imaginary version of the closed country. Though a North Korean defector served as an advisor and writer in order to ground this show in as much realism as possible, the unique setting of North Korea enables a kind of imaginary realism in which the military hero navigates multiple threats to the female protagonist in the form of shootings, hideouts, and eventual escape via the DMZ. Mr. Sunshine also utilizes Korean history to engage in melodramatic tendencies. It is set in a rare period in Korean history at the end of the Joseon dynasty, where the Korean monarchy reformed into what is called the Great Korean Empire to combat the eclipse of Japanese annexation. Lasting only 13 years, this is a period relatively unknown to the everyday audience, especially to non-Koreans. And considering that this is the first Netflix fully funded show, that's a very interesting choice. But this precarious setting proves crucial in allowing the writers to embellish on Korea's efforts for modernization, as well as for international diplomatic relations during this time. And such beautification of this overshadowed political period also functions to enhance the love story between the Americanized soldier and the freedom-fighting Korean female, where the American identity acts as a shield for the female protagonist's nationalist efforts. Interestingly, Queen of Tears aligns itself closer to the traditional K-romance, where the threat comes from the ultra-rich high society of South Korea. So the chaebol world has been an integral part of most K-dramas, where greed, ambition, and jealousy are aided by endless financial resources to lead to political games, threats, and even murders. And though historically it has been the male lead who is usually the insider of this exclusive world, here in this drama, he is the outsider who puts an end to the crazy situation through his intelligence and fighting skills. So what I'm trying to show is that ranging from an earthquake, a terrorist attack, the historical setting of colonization, to the absurd and illegal setting of a South Korean citizen being stuck on North Korean territory, these dramas consistently feature settings that are literally extraordinary, as in out of the ordinary, thereby allowing the similarly extraordinary male characters to then enact their heroism. In this sense, these dramas are not all that different from the fantasy heritage rom-coms, where an unfamiliar setting provides the circumstances to perform what is effectively the female viewer's fantasies. Yet, the key difference is that the romance storylines appear to be contingent not on fantasy, but on a form of realism that is imbued with melodrama and action. So I've tentatively labeled, this is still a work in progress, by the way. So I've tentatively labeled these dramas action mellow romances, but it's very cumbersome to read, and I know it's not a very sexy label. So likely it will change if I get to rework this, but this is what I'm just going to call it for the remainder of this talk, and what I'm calling it for now. So my interest in the action mellow romance is twofold. So on a textual level, I situate the extraordinary male lover trope within the changing gender dynamics of K-romances overall. So, you know, for example, there is a clear alteration in the identity of the female leads in recent dramas. Whereas in the past, the female lead was often the kind but, poor soul who wins the attention of a rich, spoilt man. In these dramas, the female is no longer kind nor poor. So if she's not the heiress of a Teba herself, as in Crash Landing or Queen of Tears, then she is equally elite as a Yangban aristocratic daughter in Mr. Sunshine, or as a successful doctor in Descendants of the Sun. Sorry, I've done that earlier, sorry. Moreover, what was previously the typical characterization of male leads in K-romances now becomes embodied by the female protagonist. So by this, I'm referring to the Korean neologism 차도남, which is an abbreviation of the phrase 차가운 도시 남자, literally a cold man of the city. And for a while, K-romances repeatedly played on this Korean female fantasy of a cold-hearted, stylish, successful urban man who is only warm towards his lover. But this trope is repeatedly topsy-turvied in hit shows of recent years, where one notices the female lead now manifesting the cold, rational, level-headed attitude that is not easily prone to love. Moreover, in all 4 dramas that I examine as part of the action mellow romance, the female leads are not only ambitious and successful in their work, but they are so focused on building their business that they are reluctant to open up to love. And this is an important premise that had previously been associated with the male leads. So Queen of Tears goes one step further by depicting the female as someone struggling to express emotions altogether. So this conversion of the 차도남 to the 차도녀, the 차가운 도시 여자, the cold city woman, I think is insightful in exposing transformations to the romance fantasy of the majority female viewers of K-dramas. So whereas in the past, female characters acted almost as a sounding board for the male character's development, this trend gets inverted now so that the narrative arc follows the female character's development. And it's almost as though female viewers are no longer satisfied with the ability to simply influence the cold-hearted, stylish man, but now desire to experience the change directly in the female characters. In other words, the female fantasy of K-romances no longer lies in the male character, but rather in the female protagonist. And yet, this reversal, this upgrade in the female identity fantasy does not lead to a reversal of gendered characterization. So we don't now get like a poor, kind male lead. Instead, there is a hyperbolization of gender dynamics where the male lead also gets upgraded into now the extraordinary male lover. So since the female is now as socially and or financially successful as the man, the male character's physical skills are now called upon in order to designate him as one step above the female. So by charting these transformations in several of the core tropes of the K-romance, I'm trying to show that the recurrence of the extraordinary male lover trope is, at least in part, symptomatic of changes in the overall gender dynamics of K-romances. But what is so interesting about these hyperbolized gender dynamics is the way in which these male lovers are depicted as not necessarily charming companions for everyday life, as has tended to be in the romance genre, but rather as necessary heroes for avoiding fatal death. So without these men, the female characters would have literally died in multiple fatal incidences of each narrative. And herein lies my second interest in this body of romance dramas, which is the generic context through which the trope of the capitalist knight in shining armor is upgraded, specifically in the use of the melodrama genre to underscore precarity in the settings. So my analysis begins with a quote from an article by Jung Lee, where she analyzes two hit drama shows from 2013, The Heirs and My Love from the Star. And here he observes that while melodramas of earlier periods had depicted the heroic struggles of ordinary people who were victims of social justice, melodrama in the neoliberal era pictures the everyday struggles of extraordinary heroes to save their helpless beloveds from villainous elites. And that's a quote from this article. So here, Yi's first category refers to both television and films over a wide period of multiple decades, including the golden age of Korean cinema, which is usually taken to be the 50s and 60s, when melodrama dominated as a cinematic form. And it's certainly true that films of this period depicted the struggles of ordinary lives at this tumultuous moment in Korean history. And as McHugh and Abelman note in their renowned edited volume, the South Korean melodrama was distinct from its Western counterpart through its alignment or proximity between traumatic lived historical circumstance and the melodramatic narrative. In other words, melodrama, rather than making the real and ordinary more interesting through heightened dramatic utterances, as in the West, was construed as the most efficacious mode of realism in the Korean context. That, and this is a quote, that apprehended something of the lived impact in the pace, disorientating reversals, and effective access of the narration. In many ways, McHugh and Abelman's description of the 50s golden age melodrama films are surprisingly appropriate for describing the melodrama K-romances of the early 2000s, like the Season series. In these upheaval-prone narratives, the country's disorientating experience of enduring a financial crisis, the IMF crisis, globalization, and rapid modifications towards neoliberal capitalism at the turn of the new century are all implicated in the macro-level struggles that viewers witness of financial crisis in families, characters losing touch after going abroad, sudden riches, changes to social laddering, and the general struggle of surviving everyday life. It is also true that by the 2010s, the melodramatic narratives of K-dramas were no longer based on these disorientating reversals and the impact of rapid change, but instead engineered by individual villains among the elite. So as Jung Lee analyzes in this article, the depictions of abuse of power by the rich in these narratives echoed the reality of 2010s, in which various and some ludicrous, like the nut rage story, stories of corruption among the elite and politicians flooded the Korean media. As the male characters of these dramas display their skillfulness in navigating the extremitized everyday scenarios impacting their lovers, indeed, the fantasy of these dramas was that the survivalist ideology of our time can be countered by reformed heirs from the higher social order. However, in the K-romances of the late 2010s and 2020s, not only does villainy manifest in the overall circumstances rather than in specific individuals, but the struggles depicted are also far intensified, now featuring life-threatening disasters such as terrorist kidnappings, shootings, and regularly murders. So in my analysis, I link the extremitized conditions of these dramas of terrorism, colonization, war zones, etc., to the current socioeconomic climate in Korean society of extremitized precarity and pending disasters. And indeed, the late 2010s and 2020s have witnessed a rising number of man-made disasters, corporation-level crimes, as well as an overarching infrastructural failure to safeguard public goods. And alongside this kind of social commentary made by the melodramatic setting, I then explore, the kind of hero desired at this time of precarity, specifically examining the shift in the expectation of the male lover from a financial savior or a dedicated companion to almost a bodyguard figure, crucial for surviving the unexpected mishaps of neoliberal life. In a way, it is as though these dramas warn viewers that a man is needed not only for love, but also for actual survival in today's catastrophe-prone society. And within this context, I think it's really interesting that we've had bodyguard lovers come back in recent years as well, in the last 2 years. So against this kind of evolution of the K-romance, I take Jung Lee's insightful formula and tweak it and extend it to perceive that if K-dramas specifically of the 1990s and early 2000s had depicted the heroic struggles of ordinary people who were victims of social justice, and K-dramas of the early 2010s had portrayed the everyday struggles of extraordinary heroes to save their loves from villainous elites, then the K-dramas of the 2020s, late 2010s and 2020s, illustrate the catastrophic struggles of extraordinary heroes to save their beloveds from life-threatening incidents that may not appear every day, but are nonetheless plausible parts of life today. So I'm ultimately interested in this kind of evolution of the K-romance, in not only perceiving how the return of the melodrama genre in recent years is tied to the socioeconomic conditions of Korean society, but also how such socioeconomic changes are then affecting the gender politics of romance stories and romance fantasies. And of course, in exploring the role of the extraordinary male lover, I lay emphasis on the endurance of patriarchal masculinity in K-romances and the limits in that sense of the K-romance imagination. So just before I finish, for this presentation, I haven't had time to indulge further, but I am also fascinated by the cyclic return of genres. And I think in recent years, you can even call it like the comeback of the melodrama in Korean TVs recently. And with that, I'm noticing a lot of the return of older tropes, such as terminal illness is coming back, tragic endings as well. So within the context of 2010s and 20s, as this very highly unique period in Korean broadcasting history, where Netflix and other international streaming platforms are rapidly transforming both the infrastructure and the contents of Korean dramas, I'm kind of fascinated by the role that melodrama is playing in securing a global fandom through the intertextual references that it makes back to its own dramas that only fans will recognize, right? So I've rushed through this idea a little because I haven't fully developed it yet. It is a work in progress, but I'd be happy to talk about it more if anyone wants to in the Q&A. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you very much. We will do a quick roundtable Q&A session for the first panel. And so I'll start off with Steve's presentation, and I'm always fascinated by the effeminate male character actually in both of your presentations. But it's not just K-drama, it's also K-pop as well. It's actually quite ubiquitous in Korea to display this kind of effeminate male, this man who is just a heartthrob and someone who can feel, as opposed to, I don't know, like a Liam Neeson character or like a Russell Crowe character from Gladiator. So then how do you think the non-Korean viewers view this kind of male characteristic?
Well, I think that this is a question probably for Ji-Yoon, because I think Ji-Yoon is talking about these larger than life and stronger than life characters. I mean, I think part of just generally, really quickly, the appeal of K-drama to viewers, and probably it's the case that most viewers are women, that there's this possibility of men openly exposing their emotional vulnerability. And that's something that you don't get in a lot of American. But
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. Ji-Yoon, would you like to add to that?
I have to answer as a fan of K-drama. And when I talk to my friends about K-drama, I have a lot of friends who are also fans of K-drama. I think that precise kind of gender dynamics of the man who's quite sensitive, right? Emotional vulnerability is something so fresh for global audiences. And I think it's actually quite fresh within Korea too, because when you look at the actual society of Korea, there's such a strong wave of like anti-feminism in the younger generation. Actually, in the younger generations, like dynamics of romance, I don't think we always get the same emotional vulnerability. And yet on TV, it's repeated over and over again as the ideal. And I think that's where the fantasy comes in that works for both domestic and international viewers.
I mean, to what extent do you think being emotionally vulnerable is actually valorized as part of their superhuman?
In these dramas. You know, I'm so fascinated by this. I don't know if anyone's watching the new Genie K-drama that just got released last week, but we're seeing so much violence in female characters that I think is so strange, but it's meant to be done for comedic issues. So like the woman constantly beats up her lover and it's meant to be funny. Like she's got like a hammer at one point and she's just beating him for like 20 seconds on screen. But somehow that aggression in females, I think, is still cute. Whereas the emotional vulnerability in man is kind of goes with that to match that level. And yet when disaster hits, he has to be a genie in order to be able to save her. So I think it's so important that everyday life, they are this kind of submissive character, and yet in crucial moments, you need them to step up.
And so in the end, in some sense, their emotional vulnerability still reiterates gender, the differences in terms of gender.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, reiterates, but I think it goes hand in hand together. But at least for me, I feel like the everyday companion you want is this submissive person. And yet, in the crucial moments that make the narrative and that draw us to these lovers, is the moments where they then display the masculinity that works to kind of, you know, shine it, make it shine brighter. And I guess it does reiterate, you're right. Yeah.
Going off of your affective interlude, I think this is really fascinating because you showed a long clip of 2125 without any subtitles, and that was deliberate.
Yeah, I guess so. I was asked by the organizers to submit my
Yeah.
thing, and I didn't know if it would have subtitles or not. But
Ah.
I mean, in a way, I don't know if you're going in this direction, but it doesn't matter.
That's my point, right? It didn't have subtitle. I thought you did this purposely because you wanted to actually show and demonstrate the affective interlude, where you don't need to understand what they're saying, but it's everything around it, every other shot that was edited into that engagement between the two that creates this affect. Am I reading this correctly?
Yeah. That's so. I'm trying to identify that, and including all of the understandings of thinking about national division through shows like Crash Landing on You. But I wanted to also have us focus on the aesthetics of what we see, and in a moment like that, there's some sense in which I can see this as a student that watched avant-garde cinema and watched their European art cinema, but then using these techniques within this very commercial form. So that was really striking to me. And ultimately, I mean, I have to admit that even when I see it, every time I always get a little emotional. I kind of feel for the characters in a way because just the intonation, the cutting. It doesn't matter how they got from the lighthouse to the phone booth. It doesn't matter. It's just the flow of the feeling that just kind of brings us through.
And this is a technique used in almost every K-drama.
Yeah, there are, even the most kind of, let's say, action-oriented thriller, male gangster dramas. There's a moment where you have this kind of montage sequence. And I'm also saying that these kinds of sequences are not limited to just Korean drama either, but K-drama exemplifies this spectacle of sincere and sentimental melodramatic feeling, maybe kind of as the most, in some sense, and that these moments put into motion, the possibility of that feeling within the Korean social and ethical context.
It's so pervasive in K-drama that when you see it, you don't even recognize it anymore. It's just part of the language of K-drama. For example, whereas in Pixar's Up, there's that one sequence, that 10-minute sequence where there's no dialogue, and everyone is crying. Right? There's no one who is not crying in this sequence in Up, right? And no dialogue. Right, and it's so affectively powerful, right? But again, in K-drama, it's such a integral part of the language. The sequence is just, it doesn't even register at this point, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I've heard from people that watch K-dramas a lot is that people will sometimes actually fast forward these moments, but actually, you know, so they're getting the plot, they're getting the dialogue, but they're not getting the feeling.
The affective, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think the feeling is so important,
Mm.
and this is what is communicated also in the dialogue, but it's actually concentrated, the communication of feeling in these moments.
Actually, I love the concept of this interlude, the affective interlude, but I think it has a practical function as well. So like when I talk to older people who watch K-drama, they're always multitasking when they're watching, right? So that repeated, the fact that they're repeating gives them time to do whatever cooking they're doing or laundry or whatever, right? And so it gives you that space away, which I think is quite practical for K-drama. And then when I talk to my students, no one watches TV on one speed anymore. Everyone's 1.15, 1.25, right? So even when they watch it in 1.25, I think those interviews are still a little bit of a break that it helps them with the speed.
Well,
So it has this practical way in which it works with the audience as well.
I mean, I think they're going away, frankly, because as
What's going away?
these interviews, as they become more internationalized, more global, there's some, and maybe, you know, instead of 16 episodes, it's now 8 or
Yeah,
10
yeah.
episodes. There's just less time for these kinds of moments where there's nothing happening. So, these have existed, you know, throughout all the great K-dramas that are 60 episodes or more. Hundreds,
Yeah.
yeah. And so a lot of time needs to be filled up, but this is time for us to feel something. But maybe there's less time to feel.
Yeah, yeah. No, going back to the male lovers, it's as you toward the end of your talk, you said, you know, this is still a dominant trope, or at least it's coming back. What is up with the Japanese middle-aged women who love these men and these male tropes? I mean, I've been watching a lot of Japanese dramas, and I see a similar trope in Japanese dramas. But what is going on with these international viewers who are obsessed with these Korean male figures?
I can't speak for the Japanese audience.
Mm.
I haven't done like a global regional dissection of the audience. But I think the Japanese audience is more in the 2000s. Nowadays, I feel like it's more like South Asia,
Yeah, yeah.
Southeast Asian audiences are big. North America is really big as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not just, and what's really fascinating is when I talk to students who love K-drama, they're always like, my mom got me into it, or I then got my grandma into it. And it's like generations of women are just watching these dramas together and then talking about it. And it's this kind of strange community building that you see happening over what is so foreign for them and yet so emotionally, I think, close at the same time.
Yeah, because as Steve said, a lot of these dramas are watched by mostly women. But then you have something, it's not a drama, but a reality TV show like Physical 100, predominantly watched by men. And, you know, I was rooting for the women to do well because I wanted them to at least, stand a chance with these, like, massive men. Unfortunately, they couldn't do that. But yeah, so I mean, it depends on what kind of a show it is, and also what is it called? The island something. Love Island, right? Which had a mix of both genders, right? So this dynamic is absolutely interesting, and the trope of malehood and male lovers is absolutely devastating for a husband who comes home and sees his wife in tears, desiring her husband to somewhat enact like any of these men, like a hero, right? It's devastating for us. Okay, I'm gonna open it up for a few questions to the floor.
Other countries such as Thailand and Taiwan have for a while been making queer stories in media and shows. I've noticed Korea has also recently started making that. How has Korean tropes such as melodrama, the extraordinary male lover, been implemented in queer stories, and how has it been for a more conservative country to try and bring that forward?
So the question for those who are online who couldn't hear the question was regarding queer lovers.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. And actually, the dramas that I look at are really commercial, big budget ones, right? These are one of the biggest dramas that kind of pinpoint each year. So I think they're always going to be a little more conservative. the BL genre is big in Korea as well, and you see a lot more of that in other dramas that aren't always on these channels. So I think the stories are there. It's just not necessarily going to be as prominent in the dramas that I look at. But even in the dramas that I look at, I think we do see that kind of diversification, can you say, of characters and lovers, but normally not in the not in the lead couples. So in K-drama, it's always male at the first female, first male, and then there's a second couple, right? But like in the recent Genie drama that I just mentioned, sorry, I was just catching up on that yesterday. And I like the second couple is really now a female and her grandmother who's a female, and it's this strange kind of love story, but we're getting like a female love of a second couple. So, and that's introduced very normally with no shock about it, no like characters gasping and understanding. There's none of that. They just make it a part of the narrative. So the fact that they're doing that in a big budget drama, I think does show that there's change happening. But the kind of advocating change, I think isn't shown in these kind of dramas, but it is kind of there.
Great. And
So I talk about, have conversations about K-dramas a lot with my students who are significantly younger than me. And they see things sometimes than I. And I've asked this question that Emmanuel posed about, what's going on? Okay. The sort of androgynous, almost effeminate man. And my students, many of them don't see it that way. They see it as a trope of, de-eroticization or desexualization, and particularly in romantic encounters where they see a trope of failed reciprocity. So, for example, a person is hugged or kissed, and that person doesn't even move their arms, who's being hugged or kissed, doesn't even move their lips. And any kind of romantic reciprocity is significantly delayed. But I just wondered if you could comment on whether you think it's a kind of a de-eroticization, desexualization. I'm struggling for what words to use to describe it in comparison to other genres in other countries.
Yeah. So the timing of love or the timing of confessing one's feelings is a huge part of the romance K-drama, you know. So to me, I would understand this, and maybe I even can guess the dramas that your students are thinking about as a way to delay that final confession. That, you know, so ultimately, you know, within the melodramatic mode, it's about eventually making a spectacle of your own private feeling, whatever that is, you know. And so getting all cold, you know, as you're being hugged is a way of just delaying that final confession until, you know, episode 10, when it's going to come out, and the affective interlude will make it even more kind of emotional. So I see it as an issue of timing, I guess. And there's always a romantic lover in every man, I guess, even the coldest of men somehow. It's just a matter of time and a matter of exposure or something.
I just want to say it's so interesting that you call it desexualization, because when I see these dramas, there is always a top-off scene. It's like a trope that has to happen. So a man showering scene is always in every drama. They have to have it. And when you don't have it, so I don't, yes, always. See, people know. And
One person.
No. So what's interesting is that we see in the interactions that kind of like the detachment somewhat, but then as a viewer, we are given that feast, right? So they always have a shower scene with the man, and like Crash Landing did not have a shower scene with the man, and viewers were angry. Instagram went crazy. People were like, after all this cheating, you would think we would have one topless scene, and people felt denied, right? So I think from a viewer perspective, it's a little, the expectations are a bit different within what's going on in the narrative and what you as a viewer want to see from these actors.
Ji-Yoon, you spoke to the cyclical nature of themes, and we're starting to see that reemergence of a lot of tropes from the earlier to mid 2000s. I'm curious, do you think that's influenced by there's been a lot of adaptations of webtoons, and some of the webtoons have either been, they started in the mid 2000s and are still ongoing. Is it that basically they're adopting these webtoons that are a bit dated, or is it more so the tastes are changing and the webtoons are now popular again? Is it a bit of a chicken and the egg, or is that just the state of the industry?
God, that's such a good question. I don't know. I don't know if the answer to that. But some of the webtoons are a bit delayed, but some really aren't, right? Some are like within a year. A webtoon that I read last year, somehow already like the poster is out for the K-drama. So I don't know if there's always that delay. It might be in some cases, but I don't think that's the trend overall with webtoons. So in Korea now, I think they were saying, I was talking to some scholars, and they were saying most like departments for film in university programs have now been changed to webtoon departments, right? Because webtoon is kind of the leading force now. So I don't know whether webtoon would always cause that delay. It might even work together with K-drama these days. For me, when I see the cyclic return of melodrama and tropes like, you know, main characters dying, like I'm thinking of 38, if anyone saw that. Like it's very rare to have a death. And the way that they do it is different. They show us from the beginning who's going to die, whereas normally it's like the detective story, but they take that out, but the trope is still there. And I think it's something about our times, like the zeitgeist of our society today in wanting to cry a bit with the shows, you know, and how our tolerance of those kind of ideas of amnesia might have seemed ridiculous at some point, but now I think it resonates with us in a different way, like the way time travel narratives come back at times of economic, you know, difficulty. I think I'm seeing it from that perspective more. Thank you.
So there's a comment from online. Over time, is not just a sense of the women having greater presence or power, but also a representation of being more of a partner sharing in daily tasks, moving away from the one being taken care of as in the past ideal. The attractiveness of the current male protagonist probably has a lot to do with the total burden of running a household and not being loaded on the woman. Probably, not probably, is the comment.
We're definitely seeing more male like interaction in the domestic, I think, labor. That's kind of the point of the comment. But I do see it as two different genres of dramas. So like with Netflix, I think we're seeing a lot more genres of K-dramas than before. So, you know, not just action and thriller and spy and all this, but even within romance, I think we get a lot. It's just a little more diverse than before. So like Poksak Sogatsoda, like Life Gives You Tangerines, that's a very different kind of drama to the dramas that I was looking at, the rom-coms, right? Even though it's all under K-romance. And I think that kind of drama emphasizes a man who's present every day as the real lover, right? Whereas in the dramas that I look at, like the Genie one, that's not gonna, it's not really about the man who's cooking for you. So I think there is a bit of a divide even within the K-romance today.
So a round of applause to our speakers. I will show you a little frame. Good. So that would be the second frame. And if you couldn't guess it then, I would give you that. Hopefully that's a giveaway. And of course, that is Squid Game. And the other practice one we did was this. This. All of us are dead. Okay. Are you ready? You could either say it in English or in Korean. All right, here we go. Everyone, hands on your buzzer. The first frame. Faculty are not allowed. Wait, say your name. Okay. Yes, very good, very good. Very good. Here you go. Okay, so the next hint would have been. Next hint would have been that. Richard got it already on the first slide. And then it would have been that. Of course. That. Sorry, Richard. All right. So Tadin is out of the race. Next one. Oof. What's in the... Oh, Ian, what's your name? Sarah. Wow, just by looking at the crown of the head. Sarah, what do you think this is? Oh, Tokebi. What is it? The goblin. That is incorrect. Oh, okay. Now this one is tough. I'm gonna give you one more hint, and hopefully it's a giveaway. Ready? One. Okay. Speakers, presenters are not allowed to answer. Here is the next and final hint. This is the biggest hint. This is the big hint. Raise your hand. Shout out your name. Someone online. I can't give the prize to someone online. And we have a hand up. Name? Emma. Landing on you. Is it? Could it be? Wow. There you go, Emma. What do you think? One more? Should we do one more? You want to do one more? Are you guys excited? You guys don't sound excited. Okay, all right, here we go. One last one before we get to the next panel. Hand. Name. John. You have a 3-second. What is the name? A little bit louder, please. In English? Hospital playlist. That is the correct answer. Yes. There you go. I'm gonna toss it. Okay. Thank you so much. Yes. What gave it away? The guy gave it away. I knew I should have done the sky. But the next hint would have been this. That's a pretty big giveaway. There it is, hospital playlist. Right. Okay. The next presenter, unfortunately, could not make it, but will be presenting online. So it's Hyun Stephany No, who is an assistant professor over at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. Hyun Stephany No received her PhD in the Department of Radio, Television, Film at Moody College. Her interdisciplinary research spans global media industries, and public diplomacy with a special focus on the Korean wave. Her interest in media studies originates from 10 years of work experience in Korean television networks as a programming producer, rating analyst, acquisition specialist, and production budget manager. Please welcome Stephany No.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm not used to having my face so large on the screen, so I will quickly share my slide. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be at the Moo-Sook Colloquium today, and thank you for the opportunity to Zoom. I have a recent condition of running out of oxygen very quickly, so when I gasp for air, that's why it is. So please understand the deep breaths. I'm fighting 저질체력 my entire life. When you were having discussions in the previous session, I wanted to jump in many times, but I will try to point to them throughout my presentation when I can. And I just wanted to answer to one question in the previous session about webtoons, because I did a recent study after streaming started in Korea, and a lot of Korean productions adapted from webtoons because it was easier to adapt, and they had to produce many more series, but there's only a handful of writers, right? A handful of K-drama writers that can write good K-drama. So they turned to webtoons, and then there was a whole competition to adapt from famous webtoons. So there was it became more and more expensive to adapt from webtoons, but it's still very popular. About 10 to 30% of K-drama is being adapted from webtoons. But I'll return to my topic. The title of today's presentation comes from my biggest research project and dissertation, although I won't present on the entire dissertation. That would take too long. I have hoped to present on a very brief summary and main points from the study. The title is Streaming K-Drama, the Evolution of a National Industry and Cultural Form. It's looking at how K-drama production process, culture, and form changed during the streaming era. So I take a very industry perspective, less affective than the previous panel. So a brief introduction to how I started studying K-drama in this period. My research is a culmination of my personal TV industry experience in Korea and a mix of global and local industry developments by the time I started research in the late 2010s. While I was working for cable channels in Korea, including CJ ENM, Jungang Media Q Channel, and Arirang TV, I saw the international licensing fee for K-dramas multiply very rapidly. And audiences also they won't call the station unless it's a K-drama issue. If there's a K-drama situation with subtitles or scheduling, they would call us. So working in television, no other genre was this big in stakes or this influential globally, and I was indeed witnessing the soft power or cultural attractiveness of Korea's cultural production firsthand. So I started the PhD degree at UT Austin in the late 2010s, which is when I started researching, and it coincided with the global SVODs, or in Korea, they usually call it OTTs, launching in Korea. So there are subscription video on demand where you pay monthly subscription fees to watch series, which is differentiated from linear TV on cable or terrestrial. So Netflix, of course, launched the first in Korea in 2016. They invested billions of dollars in Korean TV drama production, and Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus also entered the picture. Studying this development, a lot of scholars focused on Netflix's influence and how powerful Netflix was. But I wanted to focus on the biggest change that happened during this time from within, which was the conglomeration of production studios. So locally, new major-sized production companies, backed by legacy companies, usually chaebols, started producing large number of K-dramas at once. So if one production company would produce 1 to 2 series a year, these conglomerated companies were able to produce 10 television series a year. So my focus is not talking about how powerful or influential Netflix was, but I'm looking at within the local TV industry from the bottom up. What was their power in restructuring the K-drama production infrastructure to meet the demands of these global distributors? Even if there is so much money being poured into Korea, if there is no capacity to produce, there would be no global production. But I was curious into how the local producers reconfigured the process to produce for these global scale distributors. So for today's presentation, I have divided it into 4 main parts. The first is the historical context up until the entry point of the streaming era in Korea in 2016. It is my periodization of K-drama. And then I introduce the new stakeholders, such as the distributors and production studios in the streaming era. And then I summarize key moments of how global companies like Netflix and local production companies work together to make new financing models and new content through the studio system. So this is a very simplified timeline just to show the existing K-drama producer and channels prior to the rise of streaming in Korea. I periodized the first phase from 1990s up until the mid-2000s, which is when terrestrial networks such as KBS, MBC, and SBS, they were the main producers, distributors, and exporters of K-drama. It was the first decade of exporting K-drama, so licensing fee was very low. They sometimes gave it away for free, such as to Latin America, as a friendly gesture and for the international exposure, as known as soft power. So they weren't being paid much at this time, but there was an internal desire to export and go global. And this period includes the IMF era, so media also was on the agenda to break into the international market. So I consider this the first phase as an active soft power phase, and at this time the buyers were mostly in Asia. Then in phase 2, from mid-2000s to mid-2010s, there were more channels in Korea to produce K-drama, and exporting K-drama meant business. Producing and exporting K-drama took a very neoliberal turn with cable and general channels entry. And cable channel TVN started producing primetime K-dramas that were more progressive than the terrestrial networks. So programs such as Romance, In Need of Romance, really broke the idea that K-drama female protagonists should only date and love one man until the end of time. So women could change their love interest from one man to another in this series. This was sensational in television. In reality, women could change their interests, but in television, they could not. So cable really pushed the boundaries of what romance could be on TV in Korea. And then later, this concept came to KBS as well. So it's an idea that starts in cable and then shifts to terrestrial. So it's a new formation of ideas in television. The 응답하라 series was produced by entertainment show producers. So it had a game-like quality where you had to guess the main character's future husband. And productions like Signal and Miseng were also aired on TVN, which proved that romance wasn't a must. It wasn't needed to make well-produced stories. And so TVN started doing a lot of these experimental things with K-drama. And then JTBC also jumped into producing K-drama with Drama House as their affiliated production company. Because there was this, in 2011, general channels were launched, but JTBC was the only one that regularly produced K-drama throughout the year. So by the end of phase 2, the best creators of K-drama production, you need writers, producers, directors, and actors. Those who were trained at the terrestrial networks slowly shifted towards cable. And distribution-wise, during this time, global buyers now have some experience with K-drama, and K-drama's global distribution network was growing. They were conscious of how much licensing fee they were being paid. And this is post-Winter Sonata era. So producers expected to be paid well, especially the ones with Hallyu stars. During this phase 2, online distribution was possible in the US with sites such as Drama Fever. So K-drama really expanded beyond Asia, beyond the Korean diaspora, and into the West. And although it wasn't mainstream, it was not mainstream, it was still very niche, but it was being introduced to the West. And K-drama licensing costs were peaking in China with My Love from the Star, which came up in the previous panel. So My Love from the Star broke records in China, but then Descendants of the Sun broke it again. So it was the licensing cost was peaking very quickly until a sudden halt in 2016 when China banned all Korean products that year. So I periodized it from phase 1 to phase 2. I call it the network era, because the networks had all the power to producing K-drama. I want to introduce how Hallyu dramas were financed during the network era, mostly phase 1 and 2, and then I'll show how it changed with streaming. So this slide is mostly about the network era. Of course, consider this an average, and this financing structure was set in place after many years of trial and error. So before online streaming platforms started producing exclusive K-drama, it was the local networks that were the only channels commissioning K-drama, right? So it's these 5 channels that were regularly producing K-drama. They had the power to greenlight the shows, they financed most of the shows, and they also owned all of the IP. And I have Winter Sonata as an example here because it was a very exceptional case. The production studio Pan Entertainment had the rights to OST and DVD sales in Japan, and the Korean networks didn't expect much in Japan, so they let Pan Entertainment have the rights to sell in Japan, right? But then by surprise, Winter Sonata aired multiple times, starting from cable, being rerun on national networks like NHK, and DVD sales still put money in the bank for Pan Entertainment this year. So even after 20 years, they were making money because they have the rights to DVD sales in Japan. So after seeing this happen, the networks became even more conservative in sharing IP with production studios. So after Winter Sonata, you would think production companies have more opportunities, but it was the opposite. Japanese women came out in the previous panel, and I was thinking about pure love. I wanted to join the conversation about, there was research about the audiences of 겨울 연가, and it's really the winter sonata when the Japanese ajumas really fell into K-drama, and it started with this TV series. So as such, the bulk of the K-drama financing came from the local networks, and their main target was female 20 to 40s, who were their advertisers' target audience. So K-drama has been historically they were produced for the female gaze, because that's their main target audience. And I also have a chapter coming out on the female gaze and K-drama next year in Jin Dal-yong's edited book, if anyone is interested. So to target this audience demography with a low budget leads to dialogue-based family and romance series, which were the most cost-effective. So networks covered 50 to 70% of the production cost, usually, but as ad sales decreased and production cost increased, networks covered less and less of the production cost, and leaving the production companies to recoup through other methods. So if the production companies wanted to increase production scale beyond what the networks could afford, they had to make more derivative revenues. And these included international licensing fee, OST, and DVD sales, product placement, PPL for short. So the product placements you see in K-drama, such as the cafes or Hyundai, they are for the production companies to make up for the lacking production budget. But of course, they moved on to become a national identifier for K-drama. And now I'm moving on to the streaming era. I think we all agree that this is a new phase. So I'm agreeing with Dr. An Ji-Yoon about her writing of K-drama 2.0. So in the latter half of 2010s, Chinese investment froze in K-drama, right? And Netflix kind of took its place. If China broke its contract, Netflix kind of took over, and they found an opportunity in Korea, but they played it on a much bigger scale. So global SVODs or OTTs are entering in these years. Netflix, of course, the leader and still very powerful in K-drama production until now. Apple TV Plus and Disney TV Plus also tried to produce original K-drama. Apple TV produced one series, Dr. Brain, based on a webtoon, and did not produce any until now. So it looks like they have given up. Disney Plus, they're struggling to make their own identity with K-drama. And they're bringing in a lot of webtoon-based productions, and those with superhero themes. So they're trying to make their own brand, a superhero brand with K-drama, but I don't know, it's not doing so well, but they haven't given up yet. Early 2020s, Chinese platforms are back. They are licensing K-dramas again, such as iQIYI and a couple of other platforms, but they are not at the scale of originals. And local SVODs are also launched in this period, especially late 2010s and early 2020s. So Wave and TVing are launched in Korea. They are backed by local legacy companies. Wave is a consortium of KBS, MBC, and SBS, so they came together to launch Wave. And then TVing is a joint venture of TVN and JTBC. There's also Coupang that launched Coupang Play. This is backed by e-commerce company Coupang, so they're trying to do something similar to Amazon Prime, where Amazon owns Amazon Prime, right? So they're trying to do something similar there. And Genie TV is another local SVOD, backed by Korea's largest telecommunication company, KT. And then here, the major production studios were established. Studio Dragon, mostly backed by CJ ENM, SLL by JTBC Studios, and Studio S by SBS. These studios were interesting because they acted as holding companies that developed the shows, and the actual production was done by smaller production companies that they conglomerated, which is how they structured it to produce more than 10 series a year. So they have smaller conglomerated companies that are actually doing the production. And these companies are more like development companies. And then the fourth line with the numbers, I have the total number of TV series production in Korea for these years. So in 2016, it's like in the mid 80s, and by 2024, it continued to increase, and it's producing over 110 series a year. At least this is by 2024. So it's at least an upward trend by 2024. So K-drama distribution outlets, these in the form of SVODs, and then production power in the form of the studio system were both increasing together. And because the SVODs were investing a lot on K-dramas to increase subscription, K-drama creators were now gradually gravitating towards SVOD productions. So this shows that TV drama production scene is very closely aligned with the platforms and the material conditions that fund its production. And on the very bottom row, I have posters of representative K-drama productions launched in those years by Netflix. We all know Kingdom and especially Squid Game marked a really historical moment in K-drama history. And it's only one title, but still it was like a first time of entering mainstream globally with a K-drama. And Narco Saints became the most expensive Korean series production of all time. And these examples are Netflix exclusive productions, which they deliberately tried to produce stories that local networks could not. So productions that are unprecedented in the production quality, stories that local networks could not produce. And that was their strategy to gather local subscribers. And due to that, the A-list producers, directors, writers, and actors were now flocking to Netflix. So with these new distributors, the production studios actively contracted with Netflix to produce Korean TV series. So I put some examples of volume deals here. JTBC, they want to say that they were the first contracting with Netflix with a volume deal in 2017, but this is more like a licensing deal rather than a co-commission, rather than producing original series with Netflix. But in 2019, they started producing original series with Netflix. 20 series within 3 years was the contract that they made in 2019. And then Studio Dragon also. They also contracted 21 productions in 3 years, starting from 2020. And Netflix also acquired less than 5% stake of Studio Dragon. And for terrestrial channels, like I mentioned, in 2019, they made a consortium to launch Wave in response to Netflix, right? They wanted to have a comparable or competable platform such as Netflix. And while they were putting Wave together, they agreed to allow 2 productions from each channel to partner with Netflix. That makes up about six series from terrestrial a year, right? But this year, in 2025, very shockingly, Netflix did not renew contracts with JTBC or Studio Dragon, but they partnered with SBS and Studio S to make productions together for 6 years. So local production companies, you can see, have created this competitive system where they're actively partnering with Netflix to increase production number and scale. So during this process of producing K-drama in the streaming era, it's clear that the power of greenlighting and financing has shifted to the studios rather than the networks. So here I have as a reminder to compare with the streaming era. Networks were the only commissioners that greenlighted the shows and invested the majority of the cost before global streamers entered the picture. But how did financing K-drama change in the streaming era, right? I say it was the studios which went to Netflix to achieve global distribution and receive at least half of the production cost. If it's exclusively Netflix production, they would receive 100% of the production cost. But for the productions that they're co-commissioning with local networks, if the story fits local distribution, then they would also the local networks would also invest 50% of the production costs, so half and half. And this process is, I have evidence by interviewing the local producers. So this would achieve instant global distribution, right? Contracting with Netflix would achieve instant global distribution. So they wouldn't really have a derivative market in this case. So the conglomerated studios had so many more options than before. They were affiliated with chaebols, so they had captive channels, but they were independent enough to contract productions unrelated to those channels as well. They could even produce co-commissions for other channels not affiliated to them. That's how independent they kind of were from their parent company. They also produced solely for exclusive Netflix productions. So K-drama greenlighting and production, I say, gravitated to the studios from the networks. And so there was a new range of ways to make K-drama, which diversified its production genre in the end. So to conclude, I argue the current power of K-drama production is with the production studios. And the TV industry that once tried to develop its own national SVOD or OTT to compete with Netflix, but the domestic market is not big enough to run that platform. And they also tried to make it bigger as an Asian platform, but that's also very difficult to do. So we'll have to see whether the merging of Wave and TVing, they decided to merge earlier this year in July. So we'll see if that will bring synergy and increase subscribers. But still, it's very asymmetrical from the start to compete platforms like Netflix and local Korean distributors. And in addition, the current production scale of K-drama on Netflix is really not possible without this international investment. But I say it's worthy to note that the conglomerated structure of studios created a system to produce more titles efficiently with higher quality, finding ways to secure financing from global streamers. So the big three production companies, Studio Dragon, SLL, and Studio S, I say are in a pretty good competing system. So that's all I have. I will stop my presentation here. Thank you.
Dr. No, thank you so much for that. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Grace Jung is a comedian, filmmaker, scholar, and host of K-Drama School podcast. She is the author of K-Drama School that appeared on NPR and TBS, among others. She taught Korean film, television, and literature at UCLA and here, not here, but at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please join us in welcoming Grace Jung.
Thank you all for being here. I know it's a very long day of panels, but I will try my best to keep you all engaged by not dropping a whole lot of jargon or theoretical concepts. I wrote my book, K-Drama School, A Pop Culture Inquiry into Why We Love Korean Television, because all of us love Korean television, and it's a very personal experience, right? I mean, like scholarship and academia, the way scholars are trained to write, it's to remove subjectivity, to remove your personal story. And when I was writing this book, I was doing everything I could to do the exact opposite and put my voice in there and explain to all the K-drama stands out there why we love this thing, this phenomenon so much. And it comes from your own personal lived experiences, yeah? So that's where I'm coming from. The book started out after I started my podcast, K-Drama School, which I began in 2021. I interview primarily comedians, my fellow comedian friends, but I also interview scholars and psychologists and Korean American authors. So it's like a very open and diverse sort of platform. Okay, so the book has many chapters, and I'll just give you like an overview of what kind of stuff is in the book. I talk about Korean overachievement in education. Like, what's that about? Like, why are they killing themselves trying to get into Harvard, right? Like, is it worth it? No, it's not, right? I talk about the history of Korean TV broadcasting, like really like going back, like where and how did that begin? I talk about realism and trauma recovery, because Korean film study scholars are constantly talking about how violence in Korean cinema is like a processing of Korean trauma, but it's like, well, I see that kind of processing happening on Korean television a lot. I do talk about Penthouse, which is like a crazy one. It's really like a hallucination of makjang, truly. And I do theorize makjang and talk about the history of makjang in that chapter. I also talk about why there's so much food slapping in Korean content. Like, what's that about, right? You can find all the answers in my book, K-Drama School. Okay, I do talk about the orphan trope. Like, why are there so many orphans in Korean dramas? Why are, Korean protagonists constantly killed off by the same disease? It's always leukemia. Why leukemia? Why this leukemia blood cancer thing? What's that about, right? I do go into the whole like ethno-nationalism and the whole blood theory, that whole thing in relation to leukemia trope. I do talk about the cycle of military child abuse and bullying in Korean TV dramas. I talk about amnesia in the context of the Korean War. Like, whose amnesia are we talking about? We're really talking about America's amnesia when it comes to Korea as the forgotten war, right? So I do talk about that. You can actually read about that on Literary Hub. Wait, yeah. It's on Literary Hub. It's like a brief snippet from my book, which is accessible online, but you could also access my book as an ebook, audiobook, and hardcover wherever you get your books, including the library. All right, so I'm gonna just dive into Korean television history a little bit, just a little bit. Where does Korean television history come from? And it comes from the US and our war history, right? War history when North and South Korea was battling it out and America's involvement during that period. The American military presence at that time, those military men, they taught locals how to use cameras, how to sound record, and that was the beginning of South Korea's exposure to television broadcasting. So Radio Corporation of America, they established CORCAT, which established HLKZ, which became the first Korean broadcasting system in Korea in 1956. And then that shut down in 1959 due to an electrical fire. And the American Forces Korean Network, AFKN, that was also a major television network, which is interesting because it's not for locals. Again, it was for US military men. They needed some Tonight Show, you know what I mean? They needed to see MASH in Dallas, you know what I'm saying? So it was to entertain American military men and their presence in South Korea. That's the beginning of Korean television history. Okay, next slide. This is the first K-drama ever. The first K-drama ever, it was called Heaven's Gate. 1956. And it was just 15 minutes long. It was just like a live theater piece at the central square. Everybody was invited to witness live broadcasting, but physically live presence-wise. You know what I mean? It was like a concert, but they were televising this, yeah? And it was 15 minutes long. These are the actors. And as you can see, there are non-Koreans in the picture, right? We have white and Black American soldiers there. So it was really this merging between American military presence and Korean locals that was fostering Korean television production at the time. Anybody want to guess what Korean company developed the very first television set ever? Anybody want to take a guess? Take a guess. Yes. Oh, that's correct. Give them a round of applause. Very impressive, because they always say Samsung, and I always have the pleasure of saying, no, you're incorrect. But yes, LG, correct, LG. Before LG, they were Gold Star, yeah? So Gold Star, if you've seen Reply 1988, the dad, Jung-Hwan's dad, has a little Gold Star emblem on his jacket because he was selling Gold Star products. That is currently LG. LG developed the very first television set. But television history, right? It comes from this masculinist military history. And yet when we look at the labor force of television production as a physical object, we see teenage girls, right? So it's a gendered production history if we think about it. It's not just about audiences. Let's think about the actual production and the gendered dynamics and hierarchies of television. So here we have a lot of teenage girls putting out all those television sets out there. Okay, I want to focus more specifically on product placement in Korean television dramas. Because like when I was writing this book, I was just like, why am I seeing Subway sandwiches like in every single show? Why Subway? Why Subway? Why so much coffee? They drink so much coffee. Coffee's not good for you. Why all these coffee products? What's going on? So that's literally it. Like just from your gut feeling, ask this question, and then your job is to answer it. Like answer it as clearly as possible. Don't like make it all vague with theory and stuff. Just answer it directly, okay? So let's look at a little clip. Can I play this clip? How do I play this clip? Is there a mouse? Oh yeah, here's a mouse. Thank you, Habin. So this is from Goblin. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. So much Subway.
하느라 힘든 건 알지만 잠시 잠깐 검 좀.
한시도
All right, more Subway, more Subway. We know the deal. We've all seen it. A lot of Subway, right? So like why? Why Subway? Let's first start out by answering this. Why so much eating in K-dramas, right? They're all skinny. Why are they eating so much? How do they stay fit? I don't understand. All that sugar, all that booze. How do they do it, right? And if you guys have read Jeannie Che's book, The Renaissance of Korean Film, which is it's a very good text, classic text, she kind of goes through the whole hierarchy of like the political economy behind filmmaking. And that political economy is linked to television because a lot of these studios started out with films and then now they're making television dramas because it's profitable. So look at the famous CJ logo right up here, CJ which you've all seen when you've seen that movie Parasite. CJ is actually a food conglomerate called 제휴제당. And they began first in 1953 as a sugar and flour manufacturing company. And then they eventually developed what we all now know as Samsung Group. And then in 1993, 제휴제당 spun off from Samsung, became their own independent company, continued its food distribution alongside the entertainment industry. So even though like on paper and in the news, CJ is technically separate from Samsung, we all know that they're run by the same family, right? And that is how chaeboy works. It's not just in TV dramas, it's a real thing. Stick it to the man. Okay. As of 2021, CJ E&M is partnered with Viacom, CBS, and Paramount Plus, and they are now a majority stakeholder of Endeavor content, and the name has now changed to Fifth Season. And that's why I find Dr. No's earlier presentation really fascinating, where she's asking, well, how come Studio Dragon is no longer partnered with Netflix? And I believe, this is my hunch, the answer is because CJ, Studio Dragon, I mean, they've become a contender, you know, in Hollywood now, because they're fully in there. They're fully present in Hollywood, and they're very much they're very eager to make an impression. So if you didn't know, Fifth Season, which is majority stakeholder owned by CJ E&M, they produced shows that you all know, like Severance. They produced The Lost Daughter. They produced Killing Eve. They produced Tokyo Vice. So CJ is now extremely powerful in Hollywood at the moment. And that's not a good thing. No, come on. We're all here to be critical. That's not a good thing at all. TVN, which is the channel that Goblin aired on, is another network affiliated with Samsung that is owned by CJ E&M. CJ E&M also has Studio Dragon, which you've all seen, and they handle production, marketing, distribution of television content, including Crash Landing on You and the other show, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. Continuing with the food trend, Lotte is another major food conglomerate. They make all the ramen that you all love, okay? They make 신라면, they make noguri, japaguri, which you've all seen on Parasite, or, you know, because you just watch, I don't know, TikTok videos of japaguri stuff. All those 농심 products are made by Lotte. And Lotte, they produced the show 39. which is a K-drama currently on Netflix. Not a very good one, but it's there. Son Ye-jin is in it. And then Showbox. Showbox is a major film distribution company in South Korea, but they're owned by Orion. And Orion is known for being a confectionery company, so sugar, yeah? So all the choco pies, yeah. Orion, they made it, okay? And they produced films like The Host. They distributed films like The Chaser and A Hard Day. And both films were very successful in the international festival circuit. So, oh, and I will say this, I used to work in film distribution in New York for a few years. And whenever I went to the Busan International Film Festival, my meetings would be with those primary companies. It would be with Showbox, it would be with CJ and Lotte. So those are the three dominating companies. All right, so let's get into product placement because we're here to answer why are they such pigs on these K-dramas? Why are they constantly stuffing their faces? And the answer has to do with precisely that. Like it has to do with the fact that they were all sponsored and they were all produced by these companies that distribute food, right? So product placement is really their own way of paying themselves back, right? It's like it's the way how Amazon works too. Like they have all these kinds of distribution arms. I mean, these conglomerates in South Korea are basically doing the same thing. So all the eating, it's for a very good reason. All of it is it's potential advertisement for their own companies, okay? Why are they constantly drinking booze in K-dramas, right? Like literally every single reason is an excuse. They're bored, they have to get close to somebody. They fought, they need to get back together. They're sad for a breakup. They're happy and they gotta celebrate. They're constantly drinking on K-dramas, right? And it's like, well, why? So Jinro, which is a major alcohol distribution company, and the producer of Chamisul Soju and Height, is also a sponsor of quite a few of these shows. And, you know, having like, you know, Chun Ji-Yoon eating and drinking on K-dramas, I mean, that's not an accident. It's very much premeditated. So where do product placements come from and what is that history? And I'll tell you, it comes from the mid-century in America, all right? So in the mid-century, when television was being produced and broadcast across America, shows were at the mercy of advertisers. Has anybody seen Mad Men? Okay, somebody like, yeah. So in Mad Men, they're constantly just schmoozing and brown-nosing and trying to get their thing, right? And then something happens later in broadcasting history, but I'll show you like an egregious example of embedded marketing from I Love Lucy.
Philip Morris, America's finest cigarette, presents the Lucille Desianez Show. I Love Lucy. Good evening and welcome. In a moment, we'll look in on Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, but before we do, may I ask a very personal question? The question is simply this. Do you inhale? Well, I do, and chances are you do too. And because you inhale, you're better off, much better off, smoking Philip Morris.
All right, so if you didn't know, Philip Morris was the sponsor behind this episode of I Love Lucy, okay? Like there is just no doubt about it, you know? Lucy and Desi, they're climbing down from the cigarette. We all know exactly who is funding this episode, right? And you know, like online, a lot of people like make fun of K-dramas for being so like blatant, like, oh, like showing the label like this when drinking, or, you know, showing the logo of the cafe when they're meeting. And they find that like, oh, that takes me out of the moment, or it's not realistic. But it's like, dude, like somebody's got to pay for it, right? Somebody's got to pay for it. So, yeah, this kind of product placement history was there from the beginning of television, okay? And then an interesting thing happened in in the mid 1950s. So in 1949, Pat Weaver, who is Sigourney Weaver's dad, he joined NBC. And by 1952, what Pat Weaver proposed is he changed it so that advertisers would have to purchase ad space on television for commercial breaks in order to get their advertisements out there. So that kind of changed the dynamic. Suddenly, advertisers and these corporations were now at the mercy of television productions, right? Because, you know, I Love Lucy was, everybody was watching it, you know? So like Pat Weaver was using his head. He's like, you know, I think this content is good enough for us to change the power dynamics here. So Pat Weaver really changed the power dynamics. So that's why today when we're watching the Super Bowl, you're all there not just to watch Super Bowl, you're there to see all kinds of amazing commercials, right? For the Super Bowl. It's the whole thing is like, it's not just about the actual content itself. It's about like, oh, the advertisements are just as entertaining. Like who's going to, you know, like top Britney Spears with her Pepsi commercials, like who's going to make the most money, right? Like all of these are, it's just part of the culture now. But in South Korea, those ad breaks they're not really there. Now things are changing, but initially they weren't really there. So the only way for Korean production companies to like fund their shows is by doing embedded marketing in a very blatant way. And what's interesting lately is that Netflix is copying its own history, but through K-dramas, just fascinating. So if you've seen Stranger Things, you're gonna see Coca-Cola, you're gonna see Dr. Pepper, you're gonna see Chevy, you're gonna see General Motors, you're gonna see all these kinds of embedded marketing in Netflix. So a few years ago, I think back in 2022 or 2023, there was like a big headline on every single trades paper saying Netflix lost all its subscribers and they're in so much trouble, la-di-da. But what they weren't publishing is that Netflix is making money through corporate sponsorships and through their embedded marketing, right? So there's a really interesting like shift that's happening, right? So you can't talk about Korean television without taking American television history into context because they have a shared, very tight relationship. Oh, and the other interesting thing is DP, which is a Netflix original production. DP has all these moments of McDonald's spliced in there. And again, very deliberate. All right. Korea's embedded marketing is very much part of the ecosystem there, right? In 1963, during the Park Chung-hee administration, KBS opened up to corporate sponsors. So producers and screenwriters had to literally go and brown nose to local corporate sponsors to get their TV shows funded. And that reflects the earlier model that I was just talking about in America. In 1960s K-dramas, you see performers take a shot of soju and then comment on how delicious it is. And this type of flagrant embedded marketing hasn't really changed all that much in the present day. So why Subway? Right? That's the question. Why? It's a disgusting sandwich. Why? I don't get it. So many better delis out there. So Subway, which is an American franchise, they entered the Korean market around 2007. And before 2009, Korea was not allowed to have foreign companies be a sponsor. This was not allowed. But then the KCC changed it as South Korea started promoting their globalization policy. And that really opened up the country to all kinds of international sponsorship. So after 2010, right, in 2013, the very first K-drama to have Subway is The Good Doctor. And then you also see in television shows, you start seeing Coca-Cola products. Like I started seeing vitamin water like everywhere. And I was like, something's happening. Like Baskin Robbins everywhere. What's happening? And it goes back to that. The Korea Communications Commission decided to change things. All right, so let's talk about coffee and coffee houses and K-dramas and the history of coffee in Korea. All right, so the very first Korean person recorded to have tried coffee, and this just documented, like who knows, I'm sure some other Korean had coffee before him, but it was King Gojong, okay, who reigned from 1864 to 1907. He tried it at the Russian embassy while he was sitting around in exile, and he acquired a taste for coffee back then. And then, Gojong loved coffee so much that he and his German-born partner, Sontag, they decided to open up their own coffee house in Seoul. So that became known as what's currently known as the tabang, right? So the tabang became a thing throughout Seoul. And during the colonial era, tabangs were not just a place for coffee, but it was a meeting spot for a lot of intellectuals and artists to sit around and schmooze and smoke cigarettes and have a cup of coffee, drink some booze, and get to know one another and decide what to do about the revolution and things like that. And then the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, powdered instant coffee started entering the market via what? Oh, sorry, thank you. Thank you, Habin. The powdered coffee entered the market through the American military, right? So again, American military presence and how that influences and impacts our understanding of Korean television today is very, very significant. Okay, so initially the Korean government tried to like outlaw coffee. They're like, no, it's like, don't drink that stuff. And then the Koreans got addicted to coffee. There was just no way to stop it. So that's when South Korea, the Korean government decided to establish their own Maxwell via General Foods from the US. They just decided like, if we can't beat them, join them. So that was the beginning of Korea's distribution of coffee in a more legal and commercialized basis. And to this day, we see this like Maxwell powdered thing, like we see the powdered coffee in a lot of K-dramas, right? It's still a thing. I want to talk about tabangs and how they proliferated throughout the country. By the 1980s, after the Seoul Olympics, Koreans were kind of like, you know what, like we had the Olympics, kind of want to upgrade, right? Like no more instant powdered stuff. Like we want that drip cuppy stuff, right? So they started to kind of like emulate or aspire towards the American consumerist lifestyle by drinking a freshly brewed cup of coffee over the instant powder mix. So that became a thing from the late 1980s onwards. And then we have to talk about IMF and Starbucks a little bit. So Starbucks entered the Korean market in 1999. This was a couple years after the Asian financial or IMF crisis. And this was a period of incredible national shame and emasculation for South Korean men, middle-class men. And not too long after this event, Starbucks entered the Korean market to sell cups of coffee that would be $5 a pop. And I know you folks here in DC are like $5 a cup of coffee. That's a good deal. But back in the late 90s, it was an outrage because at the time to get this beautiful course meal, this lunch, that whole thing would have cost $5, right? So we're talking about the nation going bankrupt, people suffering, committing suicide, not having jobs, and then there's $5 coffee entering the market at the same time. And so this term 된장녀 started to circulate in the zeitgeist, which was developed by emasculated, misogynistic men on the internet, and they would critique women who would purchase Starbucks coffee, which would be the same cost of a 된장찌개 lunch that you see here. So 된장녀 became a way to criticize and monitor women's spending during this period. Okay. Let's talk about franchises in Korea. So I talk about coffee history more in my latest article. It's Feminist Realism in K-Dramas, My Mister and Something in the Rain, which is published in the Journal of Cinema Media Studies. And coffee franchises are now a huge corporate sponsor for K-Dramas. Not only that, but coffee import rose over 45% in 2022 in South Korea, and it's now valued at over $1 billion. So there's this really interesting way where there's a shift, right? This overpriced coffee consumption, which was equated to luxurious living in South Korea. It's now like South Korea is now elevating itself in the global hierarchy through this kind of consumerist pattern. And it's ironic how the trend that 된장녀 women have set is now a source of enormous profit for South Korea today. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about what's so Korean about Korean food today, right? And it'll be very brief, right? When I watch mukbang videos on YouTube, which is an extension of Korean television, especially if you've watched a lot of variety shows from Korea, it's very much an extension of that. And that is in my upcoming monograph about Korean variety shows. When I see these mukbang artists eating like an entire table full of spicy ramyeon, I'm only seeing an eating disorder. And I say that as a survivor of an eating disorder, right? Where does that food obsession come from? It comes from obsession with food because you're starving, right? It comes from a trauma of hunger and poverty, right? So South Korea is now a developed nation, right? Top 20 economy in the world. Definitely a country that has so-called made it in every respect in capitalist terms. But there is still this constant reiteration of war trauma in some way in the media. And that's what I'm looking at when I look at K-dramas and YouTube videos of mukbang artists. So this kind of like new money flaunting that's happening through the visual excess, right? The materiality. And we saw a lot of that in K-dramas too, like Stairway to Heaven, which I write about in my book. So yeah, like how is South Korea handling that new money status today? And how is that visually evident in the text is something I think about often. Okay, so again, my book is available for purchase. You can also subscribe to my podcast, K-Drama School. If you're a student and you can't afford the book, totally fine. Just go get it at your local library. If your university library doesn't have it, put your tuition money to work and ask them to order it. If your local library doesn't have it, put your tax dollars to work, ask them to order it. All of that is your right to do. And I will be happy to talk to you all about this book and K-drama tropes further. I also will have to note this. My book also talks about disability in the context of K-drama, which is not discussed enough. Celeste and I will definitely talk about disability and how important that is. I also talk about queerness. Somebody had a question about queerness and BL dramas earlier. I do talk about queerness and queer K-dramas. Like 2521 is a very gay show, in my opinion. It's like, no, like all the men are irrelevant in that show. It's like, that's a lesbian show all the way. So yeah, like how do you read queerness in these shows beyond what's just obvious or on the table, right? How do you read between the lines and still find queer lives and queer presence? I think that's very important in reading shows. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Grace, so much for that. Okay. Our next speaker, Anisa Khalifa, hosts the Korean drama podcast, Dramas Over Flowers, which she co-founded in 2017 with her two best friends. She did her master's over at Duke University, yes, in critical Asian humanities. Her master's thesis was a comparative study of post-partition nationalism in South Korea and Indian popular media. In her day job, she is an audio journalist at NPR, member station WUNC, where she hosts a weekly news and culture podcast about North Carolina. I was about to say North Korea. North Carolina, called The Broadside. She also co-created the independent podcast Muslim in Plain Sight. Please join us in welcoming Anisa Khalifa.
Hi, everybody. I'm having so much fun. I'm learning so much from all of these incredibly smart people. I don't have a pretty PowerPoint presentation. So we'll just be talking. So I wanted to talk, I think like what we've learned today, and I was like really fascinated by the presentations, the two presentations before me about sort of the behind the scenes evolution of the industry. And then, Grace was talking about a lot of the cultural forces that show up in K-dramas and things like food and PPL and that sort of thing. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this because our theme is transcultural K-drama. The way that I've seen the international fandom of K-dramas evolve over the last 17 years that I've been watching K-dramas, which is wild to me. But I first started watching K-dramas in 2008, and at the time it was such a different like environment, right? There were no legal streaming platforms where we could watch Korean dramas. So it was really like all this fan labor of people who would, wake up at like ungodly hours of the night, download the raws. We had, like many diaspora Koreans, often like Korean Americans, who are like translating the episode and putting up recaps the next day because back then it was like fan subtitles. So you had to wait 3-4 days, sometimes a week, sometimes much longer if it wasn't like a super popular drama, or if there were no like really big stars in it would take much longer for fan subbers to get along to it, or they might just not get to it, so then you wouldn't be able to watch that one. And so the internet community back then was really robust, and that was my entry point. And then later on, in 2016, I started writing for one of those recap websites. I don't know if like any of y'all were in that fandom space back then. Like I wrote for Drama Beans for a few years. But it was through that I met Khadija and Porama, who I started the podcast with in 2017. And the reason we started that was because although the online community that we were participating in through Drama Beans, through like Soompi had these fan forums back then. I don't know if anyone was on there. We really wanted to carve out a space for ourselves as Asian fans who were not Korean, to talk about the things that like really resonated with us in these stories, which we didn't really feel like we had as much of a space for, because at the time it was really like either you were getting mostly a Korean American perspective in English, or there were these like news stories about like, oh look, these crazy white ladies who are like staying up all night binge watching Korean dramas. Like that was kind of the news coverage back in like the early 2010s. And we didn't really see ourselves represented. And so that's kind of where we started the podcast. And then it's been really interesting to see how as Netflix and then later on Disney and, all of the things that Dr. No was talking about and before that, like Drama Fever, as there started to be licensing that was available for us in North America. I was in Canada at the time when I first started because I was studying up there. As these legit companies came in and started licensing K-dramas, then there was like the access to these like non-legit sources of K-dramas started drying up, but then it was this weird sort of push-pull between fans and the actual industry coming in and being like, well, we want you to buy this or pay for it, and then fans being like, we want to pay for it, but then there was a learning sort of growth period where we had to figure out how that was actually going to happen. I remember there was a period where Drama Fever was using fan subs for their streaming service, but then they were hitting a lot of the fan websites with DMCA takedown notices, even for things that would like normally fall under fair use. So I remember there was this one drama that was being recapped on Drama Beans where like we got hit with a DMCA notice and they were like, you can't use any photos, like screen captures from this drama, which like journalists use screen captures of TV shows all the time. It's like part of the job of being an entertainment journalist, right? But they were like, you can't do that. So I vividly remember like the person who was doing them like drew pictures as sort of like a protest against Drama Fever. But at the same time, you're seeing these fan subs that they are actually crediting to like a prominent fan subbing group at the time, which I don't think they paid for. So that was interesting. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the podcast. We've been around for 8 years. At the time we started, I think we were the first Korean drama podcast that was like solely about Korean dramas. There were some other Korean entertainment podcasts at the time that covered K-pop and K-drama. But 2017 podcasts hadn't really exploded the way they did sort of post 2018-19. And so we were like, we don't know anything. We're just kind of making it in our bedrooms. And it was a really interesting time to be talking about K-dramas because we kind of we're doing the reviews and that kind of stuff, following news, previewing upcoming dramas. But then we also saw a lot of like social change, both domestically in Korea and around the world. So early on when we started our show, we ended up covering, you know, how the Me Too movement was showing up around the world, the Burning Sun scandal, and sort of the fan, sort of the mixed fan reaction of, you know, associated with that. And like, there's sort of this split often, and we've kind of seen this over and over again, where you have these really beloved celebrities who are really distant from you. And I'm talking specifically about like the international fandom, and who you've put up on this really big pedestal. And a lot of times it's like K-pop idols, which is like a whole nother thing. But when these types of scandals happen, there's sort of these like two camps of, well, we love this person and we're not going to turn our back on them and we don't really care. And then there's people who are just like, oh, well, I can't engage with this anymore. And so a lot of the conversations we've had on the podcast over the years has been like about that particular, you know, separating the art from the artist, and how do you ethically consume media, and is there any ethical consumption of media? And so it's kind of a mixture of really intense fangirl behavior, which, you know, as a fan, you got to do, but then a lot of like sort of critical analysis, really in depth. Like, so we've had episodes about school bullying scandals and why they're so like kryptonite to an actor's career, for example. And we had a guest on, a Korean studies professor, who was explaining to us what the context of school bullying, like how that hits for a domestic South Korean audience, and why it's so important for like, because here, if that happened, no one would care, honestly. If there was like a Hollywood actor and they were like, oh, this person was a middle school bully, it would be like, okay, and so what, right? And she explained to us why that was more, why that hits differently in Korea. I think one of the things that's really come home to me over the last almost 20 years that I've been watching K-dramas, and like the previous presenters have also talked about this, is like we've really seen how the trends have evolved over time. Some of them have come back, as Ji-Yoon was mentioning, but it's been really interesting to see how, as you know, I don't think that TV is necessarily just a reflection of cultural and social trends. I think it's like in conversation with cultural and social trends. And it's been really interesting to see, like, as, you know, conversations around gender dynamics and, you know, things like, you know, for example, now in the early 2020s, I guess we're in the mid 2020s now, but like in the last 5 to 7 years, the idea of like a mulka, like a hidden camera that is in a place, either in a public place or in like a woman's private space, has become so ubiquitous that it's almost become like a trope in rom-coms, which is like wild to me because it's such a scary thing. But because it's become something that was, you know, there were some huge scandals about it, and it's something that has been like discussed a lot in society. It's showing up in these dramas as a plot point. Like in Business Proposal, the female lead, like the second female lead, the female lead's best friend, her neighbor like gives her a lamp, she puts it in her apartment, and it's ends up being a hidden camera, and it's played seriously in the moment, but in like, if you're looking at broad strokes, that's a rom-com. It's not a melodramatic story necessarily. I think, but I'm just like, that's the way that, you know, as society changes, you know, now in 15 years after like Secret Garden, which was in 2010, and you have, a male lead who's really, I remember there was a scene at that time where like Hyun Bin like pushes the female lead down on a bed and like forcefully kisses her. And there's like a romantic, ballad playing in the background. And it's supposed to be like this really romantic moment because like eventually she gives in and she starts to enjoy it. And I don't think that you would see a scene like that nowadays. Like it's a bit jarring to go back and watch it. But at the time, a lot of viewers were like, yeah, this is romantic. This is normal. So it's been really interesting to see how that has changed. But at the same time, as you were mentioning, like some of these old school tropes are coming back. So that sort of like candy table, like that classic formula is coming back, but then we still have these, beta hero sort of romances that have become like way more common. Like for example, Our Beloved Summer, where the hero is just this like sweet guy. He's an ordinary guy. He's not rich. He is talented, and physically beautiful. But there's a lot of more of these like very equal kind of slice of life type of romance dramas, and I think that also is sort of a reflection of like changing expectations, maybe not changing norms, but like a changing ideal of what women want out of their romantic partners, because like as we were discussing, many of these writers are women, and there is an idealization of the male lead. It's just that idea of like what the ideal male lead is evolving over time. And I think it's also a shift between like, I'm a millennial, I think a shift between maybe women of our parents' generation writing it versus women in our generation writing it, and like how as the conditions of society change, women are looking for different things in partners. And one of the things that actually wrote a piece kind of recently about the rise of the murder rom-com. And so maybe about 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, there started to be a lot of romantic comedies where there was just like a roaming serial killer. It's a very cute story. There's a meet cute, but there's a murderer lurking in the background. And it was just like this, it just kept happening and coming up. And so I was like, okay, what is going on here? Like, there must be a reason that suddenly we have all these romantic comedies and these aren't like, thrillers. They're not crime dramas. They're rom-coms. And what I started to notice is, whereas we had these classic dramas of the 90s and the early 2000s where the male lead was more of a representation of this Cinderella ideal, right? Where you have the poor, plucky, downtrodden heroine who's like a really good person. She meets this rich guy who's kind of a jerk, but with the goodness of her heart and the power of true love, she wins him over. And then she marries him and gets access to this, extreme level of wealth, lots of power. And it's sort of this individual overcoming of circumstances that provides a fantasy of, what you would want as an ordinary woman. Like if you get access to power and wealth, then like obviously your situation will be better, but it's still, it's not really overturning the power dynamics. It's just that the heroine is like now joining the elite class. And over time, maybe because viewers' tastes have changed, maybe because the writers are interested in different things, probably there's a lot of, reasons for this. Over time, the kinds of behaviors that were seen as acceptable in those male leads, and I think this is true even for like the sort of those extraordinary heroes, the extraordinary lovers that you were talking about, that still have a lot of those trappings of like that old school hero. He's a lot nicer now. Like he's not as violent. I don't know the last time I saw a wrist grab. I remember in like the mid 2010s, I remember seeing a few dramas where like you could tell that they were very consciously showing you what you thought was going to be a wrist grab, and then they hold hands instead. And it was so much in conversation with like the viewers of like, oh yeah, I know that you know that this is a trope, but I'm going to subvert this trope in a way that feels better. And like the heroine's not being like dragged around like a piece of luggage. And so as those norms and expectations for male leads got more sort of equitable, and the male leads got kinder, and they became a lot more supportive of their, you know, female counterparts, there was a lot less conflict. So we had a lot of these dramas where like, they're just two good people. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Then what? Like, we need something, right? You need something in the plot that's going to keep them apart or cause some kind of problems. And then also at the same time, you have this increasing discussion of the kinds of things that women face, right? Like, so we talked about the mocha, the hidden cameras, but there was also I was noticing an increasing discussion of intimate partner violence, like in talk shows and variety shows. And it's just become like something that is talked about more, something that women are speaking up about more. And so now what you want is a guy you can trust, right? Knowing that as a woman, you're in this environment where you could be susceptible to an abusive partner, the best K-drama hero is actually one that is not going to hurt you. And in fact, will protect you from a roaming serial killer. And so that's kind of the genesis of the murder rom-com. And like now I think it's kind of become almost like an established genre, but it's not as popular, I feel like, in the last 2 or 3 years. And we're getting more of these old school tropes. We're getting more mid-budget dramas, which I'm actually excited about. I love the big prestige, you know, goblin type of thing, but it's also really cool that we're getting these mid-budget stories about ordinary people that I think at the height of this like first infusion of big Netflix money, maybe weren't being made as much. So I think that's an interesting sort of look to the future of how that's gonna, if that's gonna stick around or if it's gonna, you know, go away. The other thing I've seen is that there's really a change in the way that, I mean, anyone who's seen a K-drama knows that there's always some kind of critique of the class order, right? There's always some kind of critique of the social injustice of wealth inequality, whether that's a central plot point, like in Reborn Rich, or it's just, you know, kind of in the water and it's not a main point of the drama, it's always there. It's honestly one of the things that I love about K-dramas. And it's been interesting to me to see how we've gone from this sort of aspirational type of story where like either you become part of that ruling table of the family by like marriage or some other type of way. It wasn't as much about disrupting the order, or it was like maybe you have a lawsuit where you win, and it's like sort of within those institutions of power that already exist. And more lately, I've been seeing dramas where it's about like flipping some of those structures on their head. So, you know, there was a K-pop music drama, like an idol drama that I watched a few years ago. I think it was 2017, called Imitation. And it's about these 3 trainees who never became like really successful. And then they kind of do like this one last chance. Let's try to start a girl group and see if it works. And it really became about like seizing the means of production for yourself. And I was like, wow, like this is actually quite, you know, like it's quite revolutionary in many ways, because it's not really about like, oh, you have this established music company. I mean, I've watched a lot of music dramas. And often it's about like making it within some music company that is a thinly veiled version of like SM or, you know, JYP or YG. And this was really about them being like, oh, we're actually going to be independent artists. We're going to seize the means of production. Another interesting example, which I did not watch myself, I will admit, but my co-host Orma talked about how in King's Land, which came out, I want to say last year, it was a very typical story of, so, you know, it has Junho from 2PM and Yuna from Girls' Generation. So like 2 like acting dolls, like they're very well established as actors, but they started out as K-pop idols, but he's the heir of the company. and she is like a low-level worker, and they fall in love. And at first, it seems like a very sort of typical Cinderella story. But Borma was telling me that by the end of the drama, it's again about like rejecting this existing power structure and really for like the workers to seize the means of production. And I was like, wow, I mean, if I had known that's where it was going to go, I would have watched it to the end. Because usually when you have this kind of dynamic where there's like an heir, well, he's the son of the company, he doesn't want to take over the company. But eventually he takes over the company. Like that's the arc, right? Like, and then because he didn't want to take over the company, you're like, oh, he's so good. Like he doesn't really want to be rich. It's okay. It's okay for him to be rich and like head of this unethical company, right? So I feel like the critique of the uber wealthy is also changing slightly. And I would be really interested to know like what are sort of the behind the scenes conversations happening in these rooms. Obviously I'm not privy to them, but that's been really interesting to watch also. The other thing I've noticed is when I first started watching Korean dramas, it was really, in a lot of ways, it was kind of a respite from what I was seeing in American TV at the time. So this is, you know, late 2000s. We're in like a post 9/11 Hollywood. It was really hard to turn on the TV and watch something where like me and people like me weren't being villainized as, you know, terrorists and, you know, someone who has to prove their goodness. Otherwise they need to be like ejected from the nation, which was obviously that was what was happening in this country at the time. And K-dramas didn't have that. And at the same time, they also didn't have this like overwhelming cynicism that we were experiencing in TV at the time, which was all about like anti-heroes doing bad things, but like we're rooting for them because they're the protagonists. Like think about how popular Breaking Bad was. Or even a show like Mad Men, right? Bad white dudes doing bad things, but like it's really cool and we're kind of on their side. And I just really appreciated how wholesome and sincere and from the female perspective Korean dramas were. And so it was really like a lovely sort of escape in a way. And I think over the years, Korean dramas have started portraying like non-ethnically Korean characters more and more to varying degrees of success. I think sometimes it works. I think the first time I ever noticed it was in Ojakyo Brothers, which was 2011. And it's like one of those family dramas with a big cast. There's, I think, 3 brothers in the Ojakyo family. The oldest son is played by Jung, and he has a son that is born out of a relationship that he had with a Filipina, but like you never see her, you only see the son. And at first he keeps her secret and he doesn't tell his family about her. And I think because he was born out of wedlock, but it's also like the element of racial discrimination is also there. And it's around that time when I think what they call like multicultural families were becoming more prevalent, like Korean men marrying Southeast Asian women, and it's increased and continued since then. That was the earliest example. And over the years, you know, we have pretty international cast in Itaewon Class. There's actually a pretty decent portrayal in there. There's a young character named Chris, who's one of the workers at Park Seo-joon's store, who is, I think, half Korean, but he came to sort of like reconnect with his roots. And he has this emotional arc with his grandmother, who at first doesn't want to accept him. And then by the end, they have, you know, sort of overcome, I guess, her racism. And it's like a actually very like nuanced depiction. But there's also been quite a few instances of just like not good representation that really leans on a lot of the tropes about other ethnicities. I think many of which have been really, you know, Grace was talking about the influence of American television and film on the South Korean entertainment industry. And I think a lot of those tropes about, you know, about Black people, about Muslims, about like a lot of different ethnic minorities have kind of been, sometimes I think they just are taken as fact without too much, because there's no context there, right? It's not a society that is, or at least back, 20 years ago, that was really interacting with those people. So then you take these narratives and you're like, well, here's just a way to make our story a little bit more interesting, a little bit more diverse. And I think as South Korea becomes more diverse and as they have a lot more contact with people from around the world, both as, immigrants and also as tourists, and with this new highly, I think K-dramas have always been looking outward, as y'all talked about. They were always, really looking to export them to other parts of Asia and then eventually like to other countries outside of Asia. But I think like it's never been more global than now. And so there is an increased conversation with international fans, which 15 years ago, if we saw a portrayal of ourselves or like of our culture in a K-drama where we were kind of offended by it or something, you could write about it on Twitter, but like the production company was probably not going to know about it. And now there's a direct, like you can make a complaint. They're probably going to apologize. Will anything change? I don't know, but like maybe this is a sign of progress, right? You brought up the genie drama, Dr. On. I watched one episode of it last night because I was like, I kind of want to just, I've been hearing a lot of things online. I just want to watch it. And it's pretty bad, like it's really offensive. They've taken basically the concept of Satan, but like the Islamic concept that's in the Quran, like that story, and melded it with like the Aladdin story, basically, which is, Aladdin is basically an Orientalist story written by like a Frenchman, or like he claims to have met someone who told it to him, but it's not good. So, and that has caused a lot of backlash online. But then there are also people who are like, well, just let me enjoy things, And so I think personally, as you can tell from my like extremely nerdy pursuits, I'm more on the side of doing critical analysis and calling out things that I think are problematic. But I also understand people who just want to be entertained and don't want to, engage with any of that. But I think like stories have power and they say a lot about who we are and also like what kind of world we want to see. And so I think it's really useful to talk about these things. And I think that's, you were talking about, Steve, like the effective interlude and like the emotional power of K-dramas. And I think that's what I often come back to is like, they're really cathartic. They're really, emotional, and they're so sincere. And I think that is what like touches so many people. And for me, like that, it was a really special thing to come across K-dramas because as an Asian person, there are so many things that I find familiar, like dynamics between parents and children, and like a lot of cultural things that are actually similar with my own culture. I'm Pakistani, but at the same time, it's also something new, something I've never seen before at the time. Now it's very familiar. So I think like there's so much power in it, and it really is able to reach so many people because of that. And so, I mean, they've changed my life. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephany. Your talk was really interesting. And for those who are here online and in person, if you have questions prepared, be ready to ask them. But I will begin and talk about, when I was growing up in LA, we had, obviously we had VHS videotapes, and we would, or my mom would go to the local Korean store or market, and she would tell me, go stand in line and go get ready to get the video cassette. And so I would stand in line, and we would, rent him on a weekly basis, watch him, binge watch really, and then return him. We used to watch so many of these videos that we actually bought a rewinder, right? Because the idea was you need to rewind the cassette tapes before returning them, right? So we actually had a rewinder. And so one of my first exposure to Korean drama was a feeling, 느낌. That was the very first one. And then, of course, the Hourglass, 모래시계, right? But then I was unaware of cable drama, as you mentioned, and the fact that cable drama pushes the limits was really interesting. So I want to ask you a question about smoking, right, as pushing the limits on cable drama. Nudity was another one that I noticed, and more recently, curse words. Like they could just say all kinds of bad words on TV now, and it's okay. And the question is, when was this shift? Right? That's my first question. Yes, I'll start with that.
Yeah. So smoking used to be prohibited. Like a lot of things considered to be terrestrial television used to be very conservative, right? So you couldn't show smoking on TV. If somebody would start smoking, they would turn around, or you would start showing their shadows, or you would show someone else. I don't think it was cable. Was it cable? I don't think it was cable that allowed that kind of a violence. Like cable was still network television, very much under the control of KCC. So the regulation for violence or drugs, like that was pretty similar. It was, I think it was really the SVODs. In the beginning, Netflix or even the local VODs, because they're online, they were not regulated the same as the networks by KCC. They weren't regulated. So it's really the online video streaming era when that violence is really added in. And so directors and producers who want to make more violent shows, and if they want to add more curse related, so rated R, right? If they want to make rated R productions, it was really the streaming that really kind of opened up that era, is how I see it.
So a lot of the terrestrial channels, are you saying that they've become weaker or they've become less popular over the years?
They're definitely weaker. The ratings are much lower. Ad sales are gone down. That's why they would. It used to be a full hour TV series that you would watch for prime time, right? You would watch it from, I don't know, 10 to 11 o'clock, but they would split it in the middle to add more ads. Terrestrial TV right now really has very little power in producing K-drama. In the old days, we would know, right? This is a KBS drama. This is an NBC drama. Like we would kind of attach the station with the production. But nowadays, it's very hard to tell because they have been very much weakened.
But at the same time, like my mother-in-law loves her daily dramas, right? The ones that are on every day, right? From like 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock or something like that, right? And you know, these daily dramas are low production costs, right? And they're cheesy narratives. They're so typical, right? And yet, isn't there still a large following regarding the daily dramas?
Oh yeah, yeah. KBS is still the largest follower, has a very large audience, especially on the weekend. The weekend primetime KBS drama is still very, very powerful within Korea. I was mostly talking about productions that were produced for a global audience. So even from like the terrestrial era that I talk about in that phase 1 or 2, they would produce Hallyu drama separately. It's kind of considered a much more prestige with a lot more resources and a high production quality production. So those are the productions that I was talking about. And more, those kind of prestige television or tentpole television are being less and less produced by the local networks. If you think about the most recent biggest productions, we talked about Genie, the Genie television show, and Dokkaebi, like those were not from terrestrial television, right? Those were all, production cost was infused from global SVODs. And so those tentpole television series are going farther and farther away from the terrestrial networks. But the terrestrial networks definitely does still continue to have that role of like the early early dinner time daily TV show, and they also have a morning block, right? So those television shows I have not added into the television shows that I have counted from mid-80s to more than 110 productions. Those numbers are only for the primetime television series that I was researching.
Yeah, and finally, it may not be dramas, but you have reality TV shows like Running Man and all of these, major shows that are on these terrestrial major networks, right? That are also reaching a global audience, right? And like SBS, NBC, they've really locked into YouTube. I remember in the past, you would have to pay like 50 cents to SBS to watch a rerun of Running Man or something. But now they've tapped into YouTube, so you just subscribe and they get their revenue based on YouTube now, right? So it seems like an interesting shift from your terrestrial channels and now onto YouTube, right? So what do you think about that?
Oh, I don't have, I haven't looked into YouTube and the money that they're bringing in from YouTube, but I do have, I have seen reality television increasing because it's only like, it's probably even less than 1/10 the cost of K-drama. So there was a time when KBS, NBC, and SBS all dropped the Monday, Tuesday slot for K-drama because it was just too expensive, and the ad sales was just not making enough money to produce K-drama. So they said every episode they make for K-drama, they were just losing all of that money. So they would replace those slots with reality entertainment. Because, and documentary like reality entertainment is really the most common reality entertainment show in Korean television, and that's because of the low budget, which is efficient for the channels.
If I could jump in, my monograph is about real variety television, variety shows, and a lot of the format sales is what ends up benefiting these networks like KBS, NBC, and SBS. So they'll take the format of like a show, for instance, like Grandpa's Over Flowers, and then they'll sell it to like NBC or CBS or overseas, and then that ends up generating revenue for these networks. And you mentioned these like so-called cheesy dramas that ajumas love. Well, that aesthetic is similar to why these real variety shows are so popular. It's like they're cheap to make. Those serialized daily dramas, the ones that they have to get out every single day, they're working with such a low budget and a very short time span. So that ends up becoming the aesthetic of these makjang dramas. It's not to, like, and it's part of the culture. Everybody is in on the joke.
Yeah.
So I would be like a little, like more sensitive about like describing those shows or being dismissive of those shows, because that has a huge audience base.
Absolutely.
A certain demographic.
Absolutely.
And it has a cathartic affect
Absolutely.
for these women watching it at home. Like you don't get food slapping on these like as a cultural phenomenon without those kinds of TV shows.
Absolutely.
So I would have to like say that no, like these ajumas, they mean something.
Yeah.
Audience base.
Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say. It sounded like the terrestrial channels were declining in terms of revenue and popularity, but conversely, there's a whole other audience that watches them on a daily basis, right? So we can't discount my mother-in-law, for example. That's my point, right? Yeah. Going to PPL, actually, you mentioned Subway. My thing was, what's up with all these Mercedes-Benz? One of the first dramas I saw noticed heavily was the Mercedes-Benz, and I was like, geez, Mercedes-Benz really wants to enter the Korean market. But why should they enter the Korean market when Koreans already love Mercedes-Benz? So then it's all about, well, I guess these dramas or these production need money and revenue, right? So my question is, are we going to continue to see this? Is this just going to be ubiquitous? Whichever drama we see, it's always going to be funded by this company, that company, global companies and whatnot. And now the world is going to have their hand in K-drama. Is that the trend? You see that?
I don't know about world trends, but I do know that it's not just Mercedes-Benzes. Like I see Maseratis in these K-dramas. I'm like, nobody can afford that, man. They're like $300,000 for those cars. So like, what is the point? And the point is, it's an aspirational thing. right? Like all advertisements, all films, like you watch these TV shows and you're like, oh, I like that coat. Oh, I like what she's eating. Oh, he stepped out for a smoke. I want a cigarette. You know, like these companies fully know this. Were psychologists hired to study this back in the day from the get-go. Like, how does embedded marketing work psychologically? And it does work. You know, like Subway sales are very high in Asia. They started out as like they had like one in like two. They have one Subway in like 2007, and then now they have like 600 in South Korea alone. You know, so like the embedded marketing is a formula that just works really well. And again, audiences are very aware. Audiences aren't stupid. They're fully aware and mindful of these things and appreciate that cultural aspect in there, which I would also call part of the aesthetic, actually. The embedded marketing is definitely part of K-drama aesthetic.
So
Yeah.
are you saying that they create the narrative? They would sometimes create the storyline, the narrative around such people.
All the time. It's like, oh, like you have to take a sip of your yogurt now. And then I see K-dramas working that like self-reflexively, where there was a show about like an actress who does TV dramas and she's in a scene where she's getting beat by her husband and then she has to go and make a cup of coffee and drink out of it. And in the scene, like in the show, you see the actress resist that. She's like, I don't want to drink coffee after I got beaten by my husband. That's not how women work. And then you see the director snap back saying, it's PPL. You have to do it, right? And so television also is also very self-reflexive, constantly like theorizing their own industry all the time. You see it in dramas constantly.
Wow. Okay. Yes. Yes, Stephany.
I was just gonna add about the global trend of investing in K-drama. Scholars recently critique Netflix's investment in K-drama, and they are the biggest investors in making the most expensive K-dramas, right? But I just want to make a point that K-dramas cannot grow bigger than the local television producers' investment so if they want to make bigger shows, they need to bring in the investment from outside of the country, right? They need to grow the audience. So if they want to grow the audience to grow the investment, and that's how they can make the bigger funded productions.
Stephany, you mentioned that which one was it?
Narco Saints,
Narco Saints was one of the highest or one of the more expensive drama. Is it because it was shot overseas?
The stars. It has a very large number of film stars, and that's another problem of the rising cost of productions in K-drama nowadays, funded by Netflix. The A-list stars only want to be in K-dramas that are funded by Netflix because they want global visibility. So as the A-list stars are kind of all rushing towards Netflix, their price is going up. And if you look at it on the opposite way, the A-list stars are not in only locally funded K-dramas.
For Anisa here, two large questions. One is this fan labor is so interesting to me. I remember when a Drama Fever would come out and would have all these subtitles, and I'm thinking, who is making these subtitles? We know now it's all the fans. A general question. How do you think they find these fans, and how are they reliable subtitling?
So I think like with the fan subbing culture, it's really evolved over the years. Back in the day, there were these forums where you had these fan subbing groups that would get together. Some of them actually were really well regarded as doing like really high quality. It was like the subtitling group would have a name, they would have a brand, and people would be like, oh yeah, this group of fan subbers does really high quality, and to the point where like, and we don't get this now because a lot of for example, on Netflix, the subbers that they hire are given a word limit of how long each line can be. And so like it really decreases the complexity of the dialogue a lot of times. One thing that I've been noticing on Netflix recently is they just to give instead of actually doing subtitles, what you're seeing when you do Korean subs is like the closed captioning of the English dub. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that, but like that's been really annoying me. But back in the day, you would have these really, people are just like donating their time, doing really detailed and to the point where you could like pause the screen for the translator note, because sometimes there would be like, wordplay that you can't translate in the subtitle. So they would translate the meaning of the word, and then they would like put a little translator note up on the top and be like, this is the pun that's being used. Here's what it's referencing, So those were amazing. Like, I wish that we could still have those, but obviously like fans are not the only way that fan subbing has still stuck around is with Viki. They actually use fan subtitling. So there was like a little period in the middle where there was like a lot of machine translated subs where they would take like machine translations, upload them, and then fans would come in and like correct them. That was a thing for a while. I don't know if y'all remember that. That was like mid 2010s. Now the only people who do fan subs are Viki. Like Viki does hire like external contractors to sub some of their shows. Like I actually this was probably the worst experience I've ever had freelancing for anyone, but it was like this Korean company that was being contracted by Viki to subtitle like variety shows. I don't think they ever paid me actually. It was rough. And I was doing these like 80-minute long variety show episodes. So you don't just have the dialogue. There's like all the like tamak, like the subtitles on the, that have like commentary about what's happening. So you have to also, anyway, that was horrendous. But like a lot of the big budget, like mini series dramas are entirely subbed by fans. And there are, like, I think you get some freebies if you work for Viki, like a tote bag or so. It's not like compensation for your labor, but they have people who do the actual translation. There's people who do like quality control that go back afterwards. They check it. So there's like, it's sort of portioned out into different segments of work. And so on Viki, you will still sometimes see translator notes explaining like, here's this cultural thing that's happening here that you might not understand, for example. But in general, you just aren't really getting that complexity of subtitles anymore, especially on like the Netflix shows. No, yeah. The other thing that would happen a lot in early days is like, when I think this was in the era when like Netflix was licensing K-dramas, but not producing or like not investing in the actual production, but they would translate things that weren't actually curse words into curse words in the English subtitles. So the person on screen would be saying like, something that wasn't really a hard swear, and then they would translate it as the F word in the subtitle. And I was like, so it's interesting. I feel like some of that has gone away because now they actually are swearing on Netflix, and so they're just like translating it. I feel like I lost the thread of your question.
No. That was it. That was actually it. Yeah. Because it's always because I add subtitles to North Korean films, and it's really difficult. So I am completely impressed by the fan labor. I mean, how much do you have to love Korean drama or to devote so much time and energy into this, right? And they're just doing it because they just want to share it with people online. And to me, it's just really impressive. That's why. Yeah.
I'll add one more thing. Back in the early days, like in the 2000s, I think there was a culture of recaps that has mostly gone away now. And those recaps were also serving as a translating function, because back then you didn't have a show that came out that already had English subtitles the way we do now, right? It would come out, and then people would have to, as I was explaining in my talk, like people would have to actually take the time working late and on weekends to do that. So in the meantime, these people who are, of a Korean background, but often, like either Korean American or living somewhere else where they've like spoke fluent English, they were like that conduit for us. And they would explain not only here's what the characters are saying, but then they would be like, here's why this is significant. Here's what, like, like things like, what does sambae mean? Like, what does oppa mean? Like, why is it not exactly the same as a brother? Like all of this like cultural context that you just have no idea about when you first start watching as an international viewer.
Right, and so that kind of translation proved to be difficult at first, but once they're acclimated to the Korean drama, Korean culture, you don't need to subtitle oppa anymore. I mean, it's just they just actually just write their names down, right? They don't even say older brother anymore. They just call him, John or something, right?
Right, and then it's interesting to see like what choice are they going to make in terms of like how are they going to translate that to English?
Yeah.
And
I still see like a critique of like political economy as well, though, because you're talking about fan labor and how it's like a labor of love that doesn't get compensated. And Vicky is owned by Rakuten, which owns Lyft. They're a massive conglomerate in Japan, and they don't compensate this quality fan labor where the fans are invested enough to produce quality work, and then their labor is completely uncompensated.
I think you get like a tote bag once a year and a free subscription to Viki.com.
That's not.
I don't think it's even the premium subscription. I think it's like the basic subscription.
And then like think about like Squid Game when it came out. It was such a like big show and so many people loved it. The only thing that the trades could criticize were the subtitles. And they were like, oh, the subtitler, the translator sucks, like you don't blah blah blah.
I remember.
And I'm like, do you have any idea how hard it is to translate? Like I translated 2 books. It takes everything out of you, and it's
really
very
hard.
difficult. You know why? Because everybody else think they could do a better job. And here's the thing, y'all didn't do it. That translator did it, and then bringing this Netflix word limitation into account.
That's crazy.
That's the issue. That's the problem with conglomerates. Like the moment something like K-drama that comes from all the feels and all the loves, the moment it ends up in the hands of a conglomerate that isn't invested in the culture, not one iota, but invested in the profitability, that's when things go awry. That's when things like translation and an authentic sort of delivery, the substance of what's happening, the meaning, it starts to fall apart. So you're talking about political economy here, and I love that backdrop.
Reaction videos, which is huge on YouTube now, right? People watching Korean dramas, K-pop videos, reality TV shows, singing shows, and they react to it, right? And now there's this whole explosion of this kind of reaction videos. Any thoughts on reaction videos? Yes.
Yeah, I guess, I don't really watch reaction videos, so I don't have a sense of like how that's evolved over time. I do think that, if you don't mind me like kind of going sideways and just talking about YouTube for a second, I think that like it's been really interesting to see the rise of variety shows on YouTube, and like a lot of these big stars who've been around for a long time basically like taking themselves to YouTube and producing their own like shows that they're hosting. Like Jung has a show it's actually kind of one of my favorite of these new, but he basically like invites people on that he wants to have conversations with. Jung of like JYJ and formerly of TVXQ, like he just invites them over and he makes them food, and then they just like gossip about their lives. And I think my favorite one was when he had Soo-young on, and they just talked about like all the old stuff at SM that they couldn't talk about before, and now it's been 30 years and they're dishing all the gossip, and it was just very, very interesting. And it was very cool to see this person who was banned from terrestrial TV for many years because of the way he and his 2 group mates like left the group basically to protest these like long, what they used to call slave contracts, like these 7-year K-pop contracts were really unjust. They basically were banned from the 3 big networks for a really long time, and from on being on music shows, and that was like one of the reasons that they started acting. And so to see him then like go on YouTube and basically say whatever he wants was like very emotional for me to watch, actually, as someone who's been following him for that long. But it's also just interesting to see how like I think variety shows have always, I mean, you're talking about like the self-awareness of PPL. And I think one of the things I love about Korean variety is also how self-aware it is. Like before I started watching Korean TV, you would never see like an American TV show like zoom out and show you the production crew, or like put subtitles on the screen where like the production team is like commenting in a kind of a snarky way about like the people on screen and what they're doing, and it's like you're in on the joke and then they're also in on the joke, and they're kind of making fun of the people who are, I mean, and everyone's kind of on board for this, and you're not pretending that this extremely scripted reality show is like actually reality, which
I think we get sold a lot more with American reality shows. I mean, we know it's fake, but like you're kind of supposed to take them on the concept that it's real. And there's like this honesty that I really enjoy. And I think like YouTube is taking it to like a whole nother level. And I forgot to talk about this in my talk, but I also think that variety shows are actually doing a better job at representation than scripted Korean dramas of like other types of people.
Okay, so I will open it up to the floor.
And I'm really behind on the K-pop, but I love watching the Explore. And like the that's done. Like really upset and starts like nothing about basically what's supposed to be French, and I didn't go like it wasn't necessarily for here, I guess. But I'm sort of curious about like what role that like actors like they're from like they were like living a certain time in another country, like what role that plays in K-dramas and the economic reason or political reason. I'm curious about that.
So I appreciate that question so much because that's constantly visible. Thank you. It's about it's an aspirational thing again. Like it's a way for South Korea to project a certain image of itself to the globe. It's like, no, we're not like, this starving country with like barely, barefooted and like flies in our face starving. Like we're not that anymore. We're driving Maseratis. We're driving Benzes. We have the amount of money to send our kids abroad and they come back with all these degrees speaking French. So it's really like television is a national thing. It's a national apparatus and it's constantly being used in order to tell their own citizens who and what we are, and then to tell the rest of the globe, this is who and what we are. And South Korea is very, very good at branding themselves, So I did write a paper about this. It's called Aspirational Paternity on those Korean variety shows about dads, celebrity dads taking their kids, like Return of Superman or Dad, Where Are We Going? That basically argues this, like through these variety shows, Korea is not just telling their own citizens on public broadcasting, we're now a country that is living off the fat and we can send our kids to private school and have them have these sensory experiences at some therapy place. Like we got the dough to do that. It's not just for their own country, it's for the whole globe. It's like, this is a self-projection to the rest of the world. So I'm so happy you picked up on that, and that's very deliberate.
Thank you, thank you. Anyone else?
Very puzzled by recent dramas. When women have a problem, they go and drink hard liquor right away. Is that the intent? What does that mean?
Hard.
What do you do when you're...
I think you should learn a thing or two.
Because it's instant. They have a problem in 5 minutes. Let's go and drink. Why is it part of the writing of the drama? Is it something more significant? I'm very puzzled by it. That's all.
Are you puzzled because it's women drinking, or it's just drinking in general?
It's excessive in my perception, but
Oh, I see. Okay.
women drinking is a trend that seems to be emerging with great intensity, and I'm wondering why.
And it's actually a cultural thing because over drinking in France is considered very low class.
Oh, you mean getting drunk?
Yeah, getting...
Oh, I see. I see. I see. Right.
Considered something
Right.
people are not supposed to.
No, there are two dimensions. That's a true point. But
Yeah.
The fact about women drinking heavily the minute they have a small problem seems to be emerging over the last, I don't know, recent times. And I'm wondering why this is happening. Is it just a reflection of society?
Yeah.
The deliberate choice of the screenwriters?
Yeah.
There's a drama called Drink Now, Work Later that was I think it was based on a webtoon that was popular. So I think it's considered progressive, like drinking and going out to drink after work was kind of considered like a male community kind of a thing. But then with women in the workforce, what the drama was trying to talk about was to portray women who have a very cool career during the day, but then they let the stress out in the evening drinking with their friends. So it's kind of like taking on that normally thought of men culture, but it's coming into the lives of women and kind of like the in need of similar to the in need of romance drama, showing the progressiveness of women. And this drama was the first TV series to be produced by TV, one of the local SVODs, and it did so well. It was so popular in Korea that after it was aired on the SVOD, it later was released in TVN. So that's how I see it. I think it's considered progressive and not healthy. I don't think it's healthy, but kind of showing the progressiveness that women are also enjoying this as part of their lives after work, is my take on it.
I think that's a great response. Any thoughts on?
The drinking culture in South Korea is excessive, but it's part of the culture, you know, like yeah, I like what Hyun is saying about the progressive representation of women and just showing that women have agency. South Korea is a very sexist country. It is like unbelievably strangled over there. When I was interviewing TV workers in 2018, I was having constant nightmares because a lot of the female TV workers just had horror stories to say. And I was like, I mean, in a country like this, like I would be drinking all the time too, you know, like where else are they supposed to let loose? And then the drinking scenes actually become a good segue into the storytelling because that's where they get to unpack their emotions. And everybody mentioned this when we're talking about K-dramas. K-dramas are about the emotion. The emotional impact of K-dramas is really what draws all these fans. And I think a lot of these Korean actors and writers are good at delivering that. And it's like, how do you deliver that? It's like, well, give them a couple drinks. Let's see what they say, you know? And that's when the interesting thing happens. So I don't think there's anything wrong with these kinds of images personally.
There's a whole rise of like natsu, right? Day drinking, right? It's just part of your lunch now. And yeah. So it's just all drinking is just a natural part of Korean culture at this point.
My question, I kind of have two questions, but I'll just ask one since the other one's been asked before. So just kind of talking about cultural appropriation and like just how in a lot of dramas, especially nowadays, it was obviously not the best back in the day, but I feel like as time has gone on, I think 2 dramas just debuted this year that had 2 instances of cultural appropriation. I'm gonna get the names wrong, but they're both kind of about like Arabian, like they had like a genie was one, and then there was one about but yeah, just kind of addressing how has this grown, how has this changed, and if there seems to be any change in the industry to make sure that future shows don't have as much appropriation as they had in the past.
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think it's been really interesting to see how this has evolved because we have sort of these, honestly, I think really Hollywood has really popularized a lot of tropes about different ethnicities that have really gone all over the world, and South Korea is no different. They've also seen those things, and I think now what's interesting in this moment is like layered on top of that is also this really keen perception of, oh, like K-dramas are also really popular in South Asia. They're also really popular in the Middle East, in Turkey, and like they want to reach those people. And I think that sometimes these terrible representations are not necessarily intentional, but I don't think that we should let them off the hook for that because it just shows a lack of understanding and research. I mean, I did hear that Kim Un-sook's team was claiming that they consulted with some people in the UAE before they wrote Genie, but like, I don't know what that consultation looked like. I mean, it's very I don't know what the other drama is that you're talking about, but this one was like shocking to me, honestly, even when I was hearing about the promotional materials. And I've heard some people say, oh, well, like Kim Un-suk loves to take on mythology and folklore. Why is this any different? And I think what's different is, A, it's not mythology and folklore, it's people's like sincerely held religious beliefs. But then also, it's really different if you're taking on your own mythology and folklore versus if you're borrowing from someone else's culture. And I'm not saying that you can never borrow from someone else's culture, but you definitely need to do a lot more research, a lot more due diligence, and take a lot more care, because you're not going to have a gut feeling of, oh, this isn't going to land right with the people who hold this to be precious, because it's not your own story. And so like, you know, look at, I know we're probably all tired of talking about K-pop Demon Hunters, but like one of the reasons that hits so well, not just in Korea, but around the world, is like the people who made that brought in like a lot of like folklore and, you know, cultural references from their own background and wrote it into a really beautiful story. And like, yeah, there's imagination and there's, you know, like they've taken it in a different direction, but it's still going to have that respect for the source material because like that's your own culture. I don't know. I think like it's also like in this global moment of K-drama, like the people who are making the decisions where it comes to money don't really care about this stuff. So I don't know if viewers being upset about certain things is really going to have an economic impact. I know that Genie is not doing so well ratings wise. Maybe that will make a difference. And I don't know. I feel like sometimes the entertainment industry learns the wrong lessons though from things that fail. So I'm not like extremely hopeful, because in my experience, when these things change is when people from the actual background are involved in the storytelling. And I think like an example from K-drama is like with Crash Landing on You, one of the directors was actually someone who defected from North Korea, and they also consulted a lot of people who had lived in North Korea when they were writing the script. And so I'm not saying that that's like a perfect depiction of North Korea. Obviously, it's very glamorized and, you know, it's made into a polished narrative, but like there's an authenticity there that I think comes across. So maybe that's not like the most happy answer. I'm hoping things change. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point about, yeah, Demon Hunters.
In the era of like streaming and the large production of these, like I feel that a lot of steps were freelancing and working as a doing various, right?
Yeah. So the staff on the streaming platforms like Netflix and whatnot, not receiving the correct or the appropriate recognition and working conditions and whatnot, how they're exploited.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about that with Squid Game, right? Because Squid Game's production cost was an average cost for a K-drama. But if you compare that to its success, its runaway success, which wasn't, it wasn't expected. Nobody expected that kind of a success. But if you compare that to a Hollywood production with a similar amount of success, it looks like, hey, why aren't the Korean producers and the writers and the creators being compensated the same with Hollywood producers, right? But of course, Hwang Dong-hyuk was also interviewed, and and a lot of his interviews were already published. And he was like, he's just thankful that he was able to produce this show, because Netflix was the only distributor that was interested in producing or investing in his production, and even suggested that he make it into a series, right? So although publicly he says that, after that, for the second season, he hired a lawyer, right? He created his own company to be compensated better. And they were compensated better, although it wasn't suddenly at the scale of Hollywood, right? So I think this really shows the disparity between the labor compensation between like a very established, dominant, not imperialistic anymore, I guess, but you know, like the historically powerful production places and cities like Hollywood versus a very new, and I like the term counterflow, very new compared to Hollywood in the global scene. It is now producing productions that are being shared across the globe, kind of like how Hollywood is doing. So more and more, I think that the local production scenery should be compensated similar to Hollywood. But then another question is, then what happens within the local industry where only global platforms like Netflix is able to compensate at that scale? And local networks are not able to do that. So there is definitely that disparity that is existing. Thank you for that question.
Can I just ask a follow-up question about that? I've never read anything about this, but were Korean producers, to what extent were they affected by the writer's strike in 2022? How did this affect contracts with Netflix? Because part of what they were arguing for was, in addition to AI but also residuals, so just a kind of new media environment, and I'm just guessing that there was some residual effect, let's say, from the strikes.
Oh man, that's so detailed. I'm not very familiar in the details, but the writer's strike, you're talking about the writer's strike in Hollywood, right? Yeah, so the Hollywood writer's strike, really, the companies, like the production companies in Hollywood kind of used the case of Korean producers, right? Because Korea, there was this idea that Korean productions, like this was the time that Korean productions could break in to the global market at a lower price because Hollywood wasn't interested in working for, they were fighting for better compensation, right? But whereas Hollywood is fighting for better compensation, Korea was like, give us the opportunity, we'll work for a much lower price. So Hollywood, the companies that didn't really want to support the writers kind of used Korea as an example for they're working at a much, then we'll just bring in a lot of Korean productions.
I want to jump in. So when it comes to the writer's strike or SAG strike, these are unions in Hollywood. So it's just representing Hollywood workers. So Korea is not they don't have SAG representation. They don't have, writers representation in Hollywood because it's a different territory completely. But I do know, because I was in LA and I was, a working actor, and I was, part of that scene. I was seeing the after effects or the aftershock after the strikes were over. So the strikes went on for many, many months. And then the aftershock of that, especially for the development stage, like the development people. So before production actually happens, like they're developing, they're getting scripts and they're deciding who are we going to cast, how much money are we going to do, and they're doing all this negotiation. Development really stopped right after the strikes because Hollywood just lost so much money. All those studios lost so much cash. And I was working for this A-list comedian at the time, and I was working for his development company, and I would always have a new book or a new script on my table for me to go through. And then one day it just stopped, and it didn't stop during the strike. During the strike, I kept getting stuff. And during the strike, a lot of non-union workers, people who were not represented by SAG or the writers union, they were actually getting a lot of jobs. So it's a lot more complicated than just a single answer. But your question was related to South Korean workers and their labor conditions. And I will tell you something, for screenwriters, it's a very gendered kind of labor. And there are one dissertation that's published, another article that recently came out last year or earlier this year that talks about the labor conditions and the women writers who would talk about how they're not compensated, how this is very high risk. And think about that. These K-dramas are women's shows because women wrote them. you know, like very much so. These fantasies are written by women because this is a hetero cis female fantasy, you know? So a lot of these like men are, I mean, are they really men? They're actually, to me, they're no different from women, you know? So like, how do we even say that this is like a queer narrative to some extent, right? Because it's just a woman dreaming of her own hallucination of a dream man, right? So when it comes to writers and compensation, they are not protected. As far as I know, I don't know if any laws have changed since 2018. Hopefully they have. I remember when Director Park was here and he was talking about how he worked for the Ministry of Tourism and Culture. I was like, oh my God, I want to talk to him so badly. And I don't know where he is now. But he's saying like, oh, I was really working for the labor rights of, you know, working conditions for these people. And I'm like, well, where are the unions? You know, because Hollywood, they know how to get together and strike. And the only reason why they did that is because literally people would die on set. Literally people would starve to death. And this isn't like no longer happening because unions cost a lot of money. In order to get into SAG, you have to pay $5,000 in order to get it. You have to have worked at least 2 jobs where you have a speaking role in order to get into SAG. So even with these unions, the labor conditions are still really lousy in Hollywood, right? Even after decades of having worked on this. South Korea is way behind. When I was talking to a lot of these freelance writers, they would talk about sexual harassment, they would talk about labor precarity, they would talk about all kinds of horror things, you know? Of course, back channel dialogue. They were like, please don't publish my name because, you know, this is a small industry, right? So how does like, you know, cronyism factor into that? What is the gendered disparity of that? Like these are really important questions that should be raised. So I appreciate your question.
Thank you so much. Before we conclude, one last word, a sentence about the future of K-drama and transcultural, transnational.
Looks like I should watch this Genie K-drama. It's been
Have you not learned, Steve? Right.
been mentioned, you know, many times, but thank you for the opportunity. It's really wonderful.
I think this future is global. I think seeing diasporic ties is going to feature more as it is more in cinema right now. We see filmmakers working constantly with co-productions internationally. We see actors coming back to work with Korean auteurs. I think we're going to see more global interactions in K-drama.
Grace.
Yeah, I think anybody who watches K-dramas, like you're part of that fandom, and fandom is extremely powerful and significant. I know, like, you know, you having a mouthpiece on the podcast as well, like calling out, you know, appropriations or injustices. I think that's important. And that's all part of the discourse. So if you have an issue with something, just express it, you know, like however you want. And trust me, that ends up getting in these people's articles, you know, like audience reception studies is a real thing. And, you know, if Ji-Yoon is saying that this is a global thing, then anybody around the world can say something about K-dramas, and that is still part of the dialogue. So I would encourage self-expression.
Yeah, I just actually I remembered something and I just wanted to give a shout out to, I think that like we tend to talk a lot about these like big budget prestige romance dramas for a reason because they're so popular and they take up a lot of the oxygen. I think like I've seen better representation in dramas that are about like the workplace. Like if there's a drama that came out earlier this year called Oh My Ghost Clients, and it's sort of like this labor lawyer who goes after injustices in the workplace, and there's a whole arc that is really honing in on the working conditions of undocumented laborers from like South Asia and how unfair their working conditions are. So like I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on. I think it's going to continue to evolve. I'm like very interested to see where it's going to go, honestly. Very excited to see where it's going to go.
Nice. Excellent. Stephany.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to be a part of this space where we have discussions about K-drama. And I've always been thinking that romantic K-dramas have always been undervalued. However, it's an industry now. It's very global now, and it's not only romance. All these different genres are being produced by, you know, the development of Korean drama production companies that I talked about today. So I only see it becoming more and more global. So I'm very excited about future productions being made. And local production companies are very sensitive to global feedback, global audience feedback. So they're listening, and I believe that they are going to be more intelligent going forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who stuck around to the very end. We appreciate your attendance. I hope you learned something, gained something. And as you go home, I encourage you to watch more K-drama. Until next year, we'll see you again. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.